The doors of the great hall slammed open before Clara could catch her breath, and every eye in the room turned toward her at once. King Ethan Ashwood stood at the top of the stone steps, his face carved from anger, his voice sharp enough to cut through the silence like a blade. "Guards, bring her forward," he said, and his tone left no room for question. Clara's heart pounded as two men in dark uniforms gripped her arms and pulled her toward the center of the hall. She had been summoned only minutes earlier, told simply that the king wished to see her. She had expected a private meeting, perhaps a quiet conversation about the harvest reports she had been reviewing. She had not expected this. Hundreds of nobles lined the walls, whispering behind gloved hands. Advisors stood near the throne, their faces unreadable except for one. Nathan Cole, the king's most trusted counselor, wore an expression that Clara could only describe as satisfaction, though he tried to hide it beneath a mask of concern. "Your Majesty," Clara said, straightening despite the hand still holding her, "what is the meaning of this?" Ethan descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing through the silent hall. When he reached her, he did not soften. If anything, his eyes grew colder. "You have betrayed this kingdom," he said. "You have betrayed me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, not from fear, but from disbelief. "Betrayed you how?" she asked. "I have done nothing but serve this kingdom since the day I arrived." Nathan stepped forward then, holding a folded piece of parchment, as though it were evidence of the gravest crime. "We found this among your belongings, my queen," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "A letter addressed to the ruler of Voss territory, detailing our kingdom's grain reserves and the location of our southern defenses." Clara's stomach turned. "I wrote no such letter." "The handwriting matches yours," Nathan said. "The seal bears your personal mark." "Then someone has forged it," Clara said, turning back to Ethan, searching his face for any sign of doubt, any flicker of the man who had once looked at her with something close to affection. "Ethan, you know me. You know I would never do this." For a moment, something shifted behind his eyes, a hesitation, a crack in the wall of fury he had built around himself. But then Nathan spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "My king, the evidence is clear. If she is not punished, the court will see it as weakness. Enemies are already circling. We cannot afford doubt." Ethan's jaw tightened. Whatever softness had appeared in his expression vanished, replaced once more by cold resolve. "Clara Bennett," he said, using her full name as though she were a stranger standing trial rather than the woman who had shared his bed for 3 years. "You are hereby stripped of your title as queen. You are no longer welcome within these walls. By nightfall, you will leave this kingdom and never return." The hall fell utterly silent. Even the whispering nobles seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Some expected tears, others expected pleading. A few, the crueler ones, seemed to hope for a dramatic collapse, something to gossip about for months to come. Clara gave them none of it. She lifted her chin, straightened her spine, and looked directly into the eyes of the man who had just destroyed everything she had built. "Very well," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "If that is your judgment, your Majesty, then I will go." Ethan seemed almost startled by her calm. He had expected resistance, perhaps even desperation. Instead, she simply turned toward the guards holding her arms and said, "You may release me. I do not need to be dragged out of a place I no longer wish to stay in." The guards, unsure of what to do, glanced at Ethan for confirmation. He gave a small, stiff nod, and they let her go. Clara straightened her dress, smoothed the fabric with steady hands, and began walking toward the doors of the great hall. Every step echoed through the silence, and she could feel hundreds of eyes following her, waiting for her to break. She did not break. When she reached the doors, she paused, just for a moment, and looked back over her shoulder. Her gaze met Ethan's one final time, and instead of tears, instead of anger, instead of the broken expression everyone expected to see, Clara smiled. It was not a bitter smile. It was not sarcastic or cruel. It was calm, knowing, almost peaceful, as though she understood something none of them did yet. Ethan felt that smile hit him harder than any accusation could. It settled into his chest like a stone, heavy and strange, and for reasons he could not explain, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Then Clara turned and walked out of the hall, out of the palace, and out of the life she had known for 3 years. The great doors closed behind her with a heavy, final sound. Inside the hall, the silence stretched uncomfortably long before Nathan cleared his throat. "A wise decision, my king," he said. "The kingdom is safer for it." Ethan said nothing. He remained standing where he was, staring at the closed doors as though he expected them to open again, as though some part of him hoped Clara would come back and beg for forgiveness, beg for another chance, prove her innocence with tears and desperate words. She never did. As the nobles slowly began to disperse, whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed, Ethan turned and walked back to his throne. He sat down heavily, his mind replaying the scene over and over. The accusation, the parchment, Clara's steady voice, her calm departure, and that smile. That impossible, unsettling smile. He should have felt satisfied. He should have felt justified in protecting his kingdom from a traitor within its walls. Instead, he felt an unease he could not name, a nagging sense that something was deeply wrong, though he could not yet identify what it was. Outside the palace walls, Clara walked down the long stone path leading away from the only home she had known for years. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and a cool breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the royal gardens, a small and cruel reminder of the life she was leaving behind. Grace, her loyal handmaiden, came running after her, breathless and near tears. "My queen, wait, please, let me help you. I can bring you supplies, coin, anything you need." Clara stopped and turned, offering Grace a gentle, reassuring smile. "You should not be seen with me, Grace. It could bring trouble upon you." "I do not care about that," Grace said, tears streaming freely now. "None of this is right. I have served you for years. I know you would never betray this kingdom. There is something wrong with that letter, I am certain of it." Clara reached out and squeezed the younger woman's hand. "I believe you may be right, but right now, there is nothing either of us can do to prove it. Sometimes, Grace, the wisest choice is not to fight in the moment when everything is against you. Sometimes the wisest choice is to walk away and let the truth reveal itself in its own time." Grace wiped her eyes, confusion mixing with her grief. "You do not seem afraid at all." "I am not afraid," Clara said, and she meant it. "I have done nothing wrong. The truth does not change simply because a king refuses to see it. It only waits, patiently, for the right moment to surface." She gave Grace one final embrace, whispered a quiet thank you for her years of loyalty, and continued down the path toward the kingdom's outer gates. She did not look back again. As she passed through the gates and into the wider world beyond the palace walls, Clara allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel the weight of everything that had happened. 3 years of building trust. 3 years of learning the needs of the people, tending to the sick in the lower villages, negotiating peace with distant lords, standing beside a king who she had once believed truly saw her. All of it, gone in an instant, based on a single forged letter and the whispered lies of a man who clearly wanted her removed. But even as grief threatened to rise within her, Clara refused to let it take hold. She thought instead of the years ahead, of the possibilities that now lay open before her, unshaped and unwritten. She had been given something unexpected in the cruelty of her banishment: freedom. Freedom from a court full of hidden knives. Freedom from a king who had chosen suspicion over trust the moment it truly mattered. Freedom to discover who she might become when she was no longer defined by a crown or a title bestowed upon her by marriage. As the sun began to set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Clara continued walking, her steps steady, her spine straight, her mind already turning toward the future. Behind her, within the palace walls, King Ethan Ashwood sat alone in his private chambers, long after the court had dispersed. The fire in his hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room, but he barely noticed. His thoughts remained fixed on the scene from earlier, replaying again and again like a wound that refused to close. He thought of the years he had spent building a partnership with Clara, first out of political necessity, arranged to strengthen ties between kingdoms, and later out of something that had grown into genuine respect, and perhaps, though he had never allowed himself to fully admit it, something deeper than respect. He thought of her calm acceptance of his judgment, so unlike the reaction he had expected. Guilty people begged, guilty people wept and pleaded for mercy. Clara had done neither, and that smile, he could not shake it from his mind. It lingered there, haunting him, a quiet mystery he did not yet have the courage to examine too closely. Nathan appeared at his door sometime later, offering him a cup of wine and reassurances about the strength of the kingdom's defenses now that the threat had been removed. Ethan accepted the wine but barely tasted it, his mind elsewhere, caught somewhere between the throne room and the image of Clara walking away into the fading light. For the first time since taking the crown, King Ethan Ashwood felt a seed of doubt take root inside him, small and quiet, but undeniably present. And though he did not yet know it, that seed would grow, slowly and steadily, until it changed everything he believed about the choice he had made that day. Meanwhile, far from the palace, Clara reached the edge of the forest that marked the border between the Ashwood Kingdom and the open lands beyond. Night had nearly fallen, and the trees stood tall and dark against the last traces of light in the sky. She had no guard, no escort, no coin beyond a small pouch she had managed to gather before leaving her chambers. She had only the clothes on her back and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. A cart rumbled along the road behind her, driven by an older merchant woman named Dorothy, who slowed her horses when she noticed Clara walking alone in the fading light. "It is not safe to travel these roads after dark, dear," Dorothy called out. "Where are you headed?" Clara hesitated only a moment before answering. "Away from here. I am not certain of the destination yet." Dorothy studied her for a long moment, taking in the fine fabric of her dress, now dusty from the road, and the quiet dignity in her posture despite her apparent lack of belongings. She seemed to sense there was a story behind the young woman's circumstances, but she did not press for details. "Well, you cannot walk through the night without protection," Dorothy said. "Climb up. I am headed toward the eastern trade routes. You can ride with me as far as the crossroads, and decide your path from there." Clara accepted gratefully, climbing onto the cart beside crates of dried herbs and bundled cloth. As the cart rolled forward into the darkening countryside, she allowed herself to finally exhale, the tension of the day slowly beginning to loosen its grip on her shoulders. "You are running from something," Dorothy said after a while, not as an accusation, but as a simple observation. "I am running toward something," Clara corrected gently, "though I admit I do not yet know what that is." Dorothy chuckled softly. "That is often how the most important journeys begin, not with a clear destination, but with the courage to leave what no longer serves you." Clara looked out at the darkening hills passing by, thinking of the palace fading further behind her with every turn of the cart wheels, thinking of Ethan's cold expression, of Nathan's false concern, of the forged letter that had cost her everything she had built. But mostly, she thought of the future, still unwritten, still full of possibility. Whatever waited for her beyond the crossroads, she intended to meet it with the same steady resolve that had carried her out of that throne room without a single tear. The cart continued on through the night, carrying her further from the kingdom that had cast her aside, and closer to a new beginning she could not yet imagine, but one she was determined to build for herself, brick by brick, without the crown that had never truly protected her in the first place. By the time the moon rose fully overhead, casting silver light across the quiet road, Clara had made a decision. She would not spend her days mourning what she had lost. She would spend them discovering what she was truly capable of, free from the shadow of a throne that had judged her without mercy. And somewhere behind her, within the cold stone walls of the Ashwood Palace, a king sat awake long into the night, unable to shake the memory of a smile he did not yet understand, a smile that would haunt him far longer than he could have anticipated, on the day he chose suspicion over trust. A knife slammed into the wooden table, missing Nathan Cole's hand by less than an inch, and he barely flinched. "You said the letter would be enough," growled the man standing across from him, a hired forger named Victor who had grown impatient waiting for the rest of his payment. "You said once she was gone, I would receive what you promised." "You will receive it," Nathan said calmly, pulling the knife free from the table and setting it aside, as though it were nothing more than a dinner utensil. "The queen is gone. The kingdom believes her guilty. There is no reason for concern." "Then why do you still look nervous?" Victor asked, narrowing his eyes. Nathan's jaw tightened, though he quickly smoothed his expression back into practiced calm. The truth was, something about Clara's departure had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. She had not fought, she had not protested with the desperation of a guilty woman trying to save herself. She had simply accepted her fate and walked away with a strange, quiet confidence that made him uneasy in ways he could not fully explain. But he pushed the thought aside. The plan had worked. Clara was gone, and with her out of the way, his influence over the king would only grow stronger. "You will have your payment within the week," Nathan said. "Now leave before someone sees you here." Victor grumbled but obeyed, disappearing into the shadows of the narrow alley behind the tavern where they had met. Nathan remained a moment longer, staring at the empty space where the forger had stood, and for the first time since setting his plan into motion, he felt the faint, cold whisper of doubt creeping into his chest. Far to the east, morning light spilled across the crossroads where Dorothy's cart finally came to a stop. Clara climbed down, thanking the older woman for her kindness and her company through the long night. "Where will you go from here?" Dorothy asked, concern evident in her weathered face. Clara looked toward the horizon, where 3 separate roads stretched out in different directions, each leading toward a different unknown. I am not entirely certain, she admitted, but I believe I will follow the road toward Millbrook. I have heard it is a quiet town, one where a person might build a new life without drawing too much attention. Dorothy nodded approvingly. A wise choice. Millbrook is known for its healers and its markets. If you have skills to offer, you will find work there without much trouble. Clara thought of her years spent studying medicine and herbal remedies, skills she had cultivated long before ever becoming queen, skills that had nothing to do with crowns or titles, and everything to do with genuine knowledge she had earned through years of careful study. I believe I do, she said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time since leaving the palace. Dorothy handed her a small satchel of bread and dried fruit before continuing on her own journey, wishing Clara well with a warmth that reminded her, briefly and painfully, of the kindness she had once believed existed within the palace walls, before politics and false letters had torn it all away. Clara began walking the road toward Millbrook, her steps lighter now than they had been the previous evening. The morning sun warmed her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she felt no weight of expectation pressing down upon her. No court to please, no king to answer to, no title to defend against whispered accusations. She was, for the first time since her arranged marriage years ago, entirely and completely free. The journey to Millbrook took the better part of 2 days, during which Clara slept beneath the stars, drank from clear streams, and shared meals with other travelers along the road, each of them offering small kindnesses without ever knowing the woman among them had once worn a crown. When she finally arrived at the edge of the town, she paused to take in the sight before her. Millbrook was smaller than the capital, its buildings modest but well kept, its streets bustling with merchants, farmers, and townsfolk going about their daily business. Smoke rose from chimneys, children laughed as they chased each other through the square, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. It was, Clara thought, a place where she might finally build something entirely her own. She found lodging at a modest inn near the town center, paying for a single night with the last of her coin, and spent that evening wandering the streets, taking note of the town's needs, its people, its rhythms. She noticed an apothecary shop with shelves half empty, its elderly owner struggling to keep pace with the demands of the growing town. She noticed villagers coughing in the cooler evening air, a sign that illness was likely spreading through the lower quarters as the season shifted. By the following morning, Clara had made her decision. She approached the apothecary shop and introduced herself, not as a former queen, but simply as a healer named Elowin, a name she had chosen for herself during the long walk to Millbrook, one that carried no history, no titles, no expectations. The elderly shop owner, a kind man named Samuel, studied her with curious eyes. "You claim to have healing knowledge?" he asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "I have studied herbal remedies and healing practices for many years," Clara said. "I would be grateful for the opportunity to prove my skills, even without pay, if you would allow it." Samuel considered her offer for a long moment, before finally nodding. "Very well. There is a fever spreading through the eastern quarter. If you can help ease the suffering of those affected, you will have earned a place here." Clara spent the following days moving through the eastern quarter, treating fevers with careful mixtures of herbs, teaching families simple remedies to ease their symptoms, and offering comfort to those too weak to care for themselves. Word spread quickly through Millbrook of the quiet, skilled healer who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and begun tending to the sick with remarkable expertise. Within a week, the fever that had threatened to spread unchecked through the town began to ease, thanks in large part to Clara's efforts. Samuel offered her a permanent position at his apothecary shop, along with a small room above the storefront where she could live. Clara accepted gratefully, and for the first time since her banishment, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps this new life, quiet and unassuming as it was, might hold more genuine value than the crown she had lost. Meanwhile, back within the Ashwood Palace, King Ethan found himself increasingly distracted from his duties. Reports from the kingdom's ministers grew more troubling by the day. The southern farmlands, once carefully managed under Clara's watchful guidance, had begun to show signs of neglect. Trade negotiations that she had once handled with careful diplomacy now stalled under the clumsy handling of officials unfamiliar with her methods. Ethan sat through council meetings with a growing sense of unease, watching as the kingdom he ruled slowly began to falter in ways he had not anticipated. He had always assumed the kingdom's stability rested on his own leadership, his own strength as Alpha King. He had never considered how much of that stability had actually depended on Clara's quiet, steady influence behind the scenes. One evening, alone in his study, Ethan found an old ledger Clara had kept, detailing the needs of various villages throughout the kingdom. along with careful notes on which families required additional support during the harsh winter months. Her handwriting filled the pages, precise and thoughtful, revealing a depth of care for the kingdom's people that he had never fully appreciated while she stood beside him. He ran his fingers over the pages, feeling a strange tightness in his chest that he did not fully understand. For years, he had viewed Clara primarily as a political arrangement, a necessary partnership to strengthen his rule. He had never allowed himself to see the full extent of what she had truly contributed, not until she was gone and the absence of her efforts became painfully, undeniably clear. A knock at his study door interrupted his thoughts. Grace entered, her expression hesitant, clearly uncertain whether she should speak. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I do not mean to overstep, but I must tell you something regarding the letter that led to the Queen's banishment." Ethan's attention sharpened immediately. "Speak freely." "I do not believe the Queen wrote that letter," Grace said, her voice trembling slightly despite her determination. "I served her for years. I know her handwriting as well as my own. There were small inconsistencies in the letter that troubled me deeply when I first saw it presented in court, details that did not match her usual manner of writing." Ethan's grip on the ledger tightened. "Why did you not speak of this sooner?" "I was afraid, Your Majesty," Grace admitted. "Afraid of what might happen if I questioned Advisor Cole's evidence in front of the entire court." Ethan sat in silence for a long moment, processing her words alongside the growing unease that had been building within him since the day Clara left. If Grace was right, if the letter had truly been forged, then he had banished an innocent woman based entirely on falsified evidence, and worse, he had done so without pausing to question the convenient timing of Nathan's discovery. "Thank you for telling me this," Ethan finally said. "Speak of it to no one else for now. I need time to consider what must be done." Grace nodded and quietly left the study, leaving Ethan alone once more with his troubled thoughts and Clara's careful, thoughtful ledger still open on his desk. Outside his window, the moon rose high above the palace grounds, the same moon that, weeks earlier, had guided Clara safely along the road toward her new beginning. Ethan stared out at the darkened kingdom he ruled, feeling for the first time the true weight of the mistake he feared he had made, a mistake that could not be easily undone, no matter how much power or authority he still held as king. Back in Millbrook, Clara's reputation continued to grow with each passing day. A traveling merchant arrived in town one afternoon, his young daughter burning with a fever so severe that the local physicians had already given up hope of saving her. Desperate, the merchant sought out the healer everyone in town had begun speaking of in hushed, hopeful tones. Samuel led the man to Clara's small workroom above the apothecary shop, where she immediately set aside her current tasks to examine the child. The girl's skin burned hot to the touch, her breathing shallow and labored, her small body trembling with the force of the illness ravaging her system. "This is beyond simple fever remedies," Samuel murmured, concern etched across his weathered face. "I fear there is little more we can do." Clara studied the girl carefully, recalling old texts she had studied years earlier under a healer who had once served in a distant kingdom, techniques rarely used in these smaller towns where resources remained limited. She sent Samuel to gather specific herbs from his stores, ingredients most people would not think to combine, and began preparing a treatment unlike anything the local physicians had attempted. Through the night, Clara remained at the child's bedside, carefully monitoring her condition, adjusting the treatment as needed, refusing to leave despite her own exhaustion. The merchant paced anxiously outside the room, praying quietly for his daughter's survival. By dawn, the fever finally broke. The child's breathing steadied, her skin cooled, and her eyes fluttered open for the first time in nearly 2 days. The merchant wept with relief, showering Clara with gratitude and offering her more coin than she had ever expected to receive for her services. Clara accepted only a portion of what he offered, insisting the rest be used to care for his daughter's continued recovery. Word of the miraculous healing spread quickly through Millbrook and beyond, carried by the merchant himself as he continued his travels through neighboring territories, telling anyone who would listen about the remarkable healer named Elowin, who had saved his daughter's life when all other physicians had given up hope. Among those who eventually heard this story was Adrian Voss, a powerful and respected lord who governed the territory bordering Millbrook to the east. Adrian had built his reputation as a fair and capable alpha leader, known throughout the region for his sharp intellect and his genuine concern for the well-being of those under his protection, qualities that had earned him considerable respect even among rival territories. When word of the healer's remarkable skill reached his court, Adrian found himself curious enough to consider a visit to Millbrook himself, though he did not yet know how significantly that decision would come to shape the months ahead, both for himself and for the quiet, unassuming healer whose true identity remained hidden beneath the name she had chosen for her new life. For now, Clara remained unaware of the growing attention her skills had begun to attract beyond the borders of Millbrook. She continued her work at the apothecary shop, finding genuine satisfaction in the simple rhythm of her days, treating patients, studying new remedies, and slowly building a life defined entirely by her own choices, rather than the expectations of a crown she no longer wore. And within the Ashwood Palace, King Ethan continued wrestling with the doubt Grace's words had planted firmly within his mind, a doubt that would only grow stronger as the days passed, and the consequences of Clara's absence became increasingly impossible to ignore. Nathan Cole's hand trembled as he read the note left on his desk, the ink still fresh, the handwriting unfamiliar and threatening in its simplicity. "I know what you did. Return what was promised, or the truth reaches the king before the week ends." He crumpled the paper immediately, his mind racing through the list of people who might have discovered his involvement in Clara's banishment. Victor, the forger, had already been paid in full days earlier, silenced with enough coin to disappear from the region entirely. Someone else must have learned of the plot, someone with enough evidence to threaten exposure. He needed to act quickly, before whoever had written this note decided to act on their threat. Meanwhile, within the eastern quarter of the palace, King Ethan called an unexpected meeting with his most senior military officer, a steady and loyal man named Marcus Reed who had served the Ashwood throne for over a decade. "I need you to investigate something quietly," Ethan said, his voice low, without alerting Advisor Cole or anyone within his circle. Marcus straightened, sensing the gravity in his king's tone. "What do you need investigated, Your Majesty?" "The letter that led to the former queen's banishment," Ethan said. "I want to know its true origin, whether it was genuinely written by Clara Bennett, or whether it was fabricated by someone within this palace." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, though he kept his expression otherwise composed. "You suspect foul play, Your Majesty?" "I suspect many things," Ethan admitted, "but I need proof before I act on suspicion alone. Find out who examined that letter before it reached the court. Find out where the parchment and ink originated. Leave no detail unexamined." Marcus nodded firmly. "I will begin immediately, quietly, as you have asked." As Marcus departed to begin his investigation, Ethan remained in his study, staring once again at Clara's old ledger, its careful notes a constant reminder of everything he had lost through his own hasty judgment. He thought of the smile she had given him as she walked out of the great hall, a smile that continued to haunt his thoughts long after her departure. He was beginning to understand, slowly and painfully, that the smile had not been one of madness or resignation, as he had first assumed. It had been the smile of someone who knew her own innocence so completely that she required no one else's validation to confirm it, not even the validation of the king who had condemned her. That realization settled heavily in his chest, mixing guilt with a growing determination to uncover the truth, regardless of what it might reveal about his own failures as a leader and as a husband. Far away in Millbrook, Clara's days continued in their new, peaceful rhythm, though change was approaching from a direction she had not anticipated. Adrian Voss arrived in Millbrook on a clear autumn morning, accompanied by only 2 guards, choosing to travel modestly rather than announce his status as a territorial lord. He had heard enough stories of the healer's remarkable skill that his curiosity had finally overcome his usual caution regarding unverified claims. He found the apothecary shop easily enough, following directions from townsfolk who spoke of the healer named Elowen, with clear admiration and gratitude. When he entered the shop, he found her carefully grinding herbs at a wooden workbench, her focus entirely absorbed in her task. "I have heard remarkable things about the healer of Millbrook," Adrian said, announcing his presence. Clara looked up, studying the stranger before her. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his clothing simple but clearly of quality craftsmanship, his manner respectful rather than demanding. "I am simply a healer doing my work," she said. "I am not certain what stories you may have heard, but I suspect they have grown somewhat beyond the truth in the telling." Adrian smiled slightly. "Perhaps, though I have also learned that a merchant's daughter, given up for lost by trained physicians, now runs and plays as though she were never ill at all. That is not a story easily exaggerated." Clara set aside her work, studying him more carefully now. "And you traveled here simply to confirm a story?" "I traveled here because my territory faces a growing illness among our own people, one our physicians have struggled to properly treat," Adrian said. "I had hoped, if the stories held any truth, that you might be willing to share your knowledge, or perhaps consider extending your services beyond Millbrook." Clara considered his request carefully. She had built a comfortable, quiet life in Millbrook, one that asked nothing of her beyond honest work and genuine service to those in need. The idea of expanding her efforts beyond the town's borders carried both opportunity and risk, particularly given her need to remain unrecognized as the banished Queen of Ashwood. I would need to know more about this illness before I could offer any commitment, she said carefully. Adrian described the symptoms in detail, a persistent cough accompanied by fatigue and fever that seemed to worsen steadily over several weeks, resistant to the usual treatments his physicians had attempted. As he spoke, Clara found herself recognizing the pattern from an old text she had studied years earlier, a rare but treatable condition that required a specific combination of herbs not commonly used in standard remedies. I believe I may know what afflicts your people, she said finally, though I would need to examine some of those affected personally to confirm my suspicion. Adrian's expression brightened with cautious hope. Would you be willing to travel to my territory to assist us? Clara hesitated, weighing the risks against the genuine need she recognized in his request. Samuel, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped forward to offer his own thoughts. Elowen, you have built trust here in Millbrook, he said gently, but healing is not meant to remain confined to one town alone, not when others suffer nearby. I can manage the shop during your absence. This is your choice to make, but I would not stand in the way of it. Clara considered his words carefully, along with her own deepening sense that perhaps this new life she was building could hold greater purpose beyond the walls of a single town, purpose that had nothing to do with crowns or kingdoms, but everything to do with genuine service to those who needed help. I will come, she finally said, turning back to Adrian. Though I ask that my presence remain relatively quiet, I have my reasons for preferring not to draw excessive attention. Adrian studied her for a moment, something in her careful phrasing suggesting there was more to her story than she was willing to share, though he respected her privacy enough not to press for details. Of course, whatever discretion you require, you shall have it. Within days, Clara found herself traveling east toward Adrian's territory, a modest caravan carrying her, along with a supply of herbs and remedies she had carefully prepared for the journey. The landscape shifted gradually as they traveled, rolling hills giving way to denser forests, the air growing cooler as autumn deepened around them. Adrian proved to be thoughtful company throughout the journey, asking careful questions about her healing methods without ever pressing into personal matters she seemed reluctant to discuss. Clara found herself surprised by how easily she could speak with him, a stark contrast to the careful, guarded conversations she had grown accustomed to within the Ashwood court, where every word carried political weight and hidden agendas. You do not ask many questions about my past, Clara observed during one evening's rest along their journey. I have found that people share what they wish to share, when they are ready, Adrian said simply. I judge others by their actions in the present, not by secrets they may carry from before we met. Clara felt a quiet warmth at his words, a recognition that here was someone who valued her for the genuine skill and compassion she demonstrated daily, rather than for any title or status she might once have held. It was, she realized, remarkably freeing, to be seen simply as herself, without the weight of a crown shaping every interaction. Meanwhile, back within the Ashwood Palace, Marcus Reed's quiet investigation began to yield troubling results. He discovered that the parchment used for the forged letter matched stock commonly found within the palace's own supply room, accessible primarily to senior advisors and their immediate staff. He also learned, through careful and discreet questioning, that Nathan Cole had met privately with an unfamiliar man in town shortly before the letter's discovery, a meeting witnessed by a stable hand who had thought little of it at the time. When Marcus brought these findings to King Ethan, the weight of the growing evidence settled heavily across the throne room, confirming suspicions that had been building steadily since Grace's initial confession. We need more concrete proof, Ethan said, though his voice carried the unmistakable certainty of a man who already understood the truth, even as he continued gathering evidence to confirm it beyond any possible doubt. I will continue the investigation, Marcus assured him. Discreetly, as you have instructed. As Marcus departed once again, Ethan remained alone with his thoughts, increasingly aware that the kingdom he had sworn to protect had been manipulated by someone he had trusted completely, someone whose false counsel had cost an innocent woman everything she had built within these walls. He thought again of Clara's smile as she walked away, understanding now, with growing clarity, exactly why she had shown no fear in that moment. She had known her own innocence with a certainty that required no external validation, a strength he was only now beginning to fully comprehend, and, though he could not yet admit it fully to himself, a strength he deeply admired. When Clara's caravan finally arrived at Adrian's main settlement, she found a town larger and busier than Millbrook, its streets lined with sturdy homes and a market square filled with the sounds of daily trade. Adrian led her directly to the modest healing house near the center of town, where a dozen patients lay suffering from the persistent illness he had described during their journey. Clara moved between the beds carefully, examining each patient in turn, noting the pattern of symptoms, the swelling in their joints, the persistent cough that seemed to worsen in the evening hours. Her suspicion from earlier grew stronger with each patient she examined. "This is a condition caused by contaminated water," she finally said, turning to the local physician who had been struggling to treat the outbreak. "Likely from a well or stream that has become tainted, perhaps by runoff from nearby farmland during the recent rains." The physician, a man named Oliver who had grown increasingly desperate over the previous weeks, looked at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "We drink from the northern well. It has served this town for generations without issue." "Generations of use does not guarantee it remains safe forever," Clara said gently. "I would recommend testing that well immediately, and in the meantime, boiling all water before use. I can prepare remedies to ease the current symptoms, but the true solution lies in addressing the source." Adrian, who had been listening carefully, immediately ordered a team of workers to investigate the northern well, while Clara began preparing treatments for those already suffering. Within 2 days, the workers discovered a collapsed section of an old drainage system near the well, allowing contaminated runoff to seep steadily into the water supply, exactly as Clara had suspected. With the source identified and repairs quickly underway, and with Clara's remedies easing the suffering of those already affected, the town began its slow recovery from the outbreak that had troubled it for weeks. Adrian watched her work with growing admiration, recognizing not only her clear medical knowledge, but also her calm, methodical approach to solving problems that had stumped his own trusted physicians. "You have saved more lives in a few days than we managed in weeks of struggling on our own," Adrian said one evening, as Clara rested briefly after a long day of treating patients. "I simply recognized a pattern others had not yet considered," Clara said modestly. "The credit belongs equally to your workers who repaired the drainage system so quickly." Adrian studied her for a long moment. There was something in her humility, her refusal to accept praise she felt she had not fully earned, that struck him as remarkably different from the nobles and officials he typically dealt with in his role as territorial lord. "You continue to surprise me, Elowen," he said. "I find myself curious about the life you led before arriving in Millbrook, though I understand if you are not yet ready to share it." Clara offered a small, careful smile, neither confirming nor denying the deeper truth she kept hidden beneath her chosen name. "Perhaps in time I will share more. For now, I am simply grateful to be useful, wherever that usefulness is needed." Meanwhile, back within the Ashwood territory, Nathan Cole grew increasingly desperate as the threatening note continued to weigh on his mind. He arranged a hurried meeting in a secluded corner of the market district, with a contact who owed him a favor from years past, hoping to identify who might have sent the warning. "I need to know who is asking questions about the Queen's banishment," Nathan said urgently. "Someone knows more than they should." His contact, a quiet information broker named Felix, studied him carefully before answering. "Word travels quickly in the lower quarters, Advisor Cole. I have heard whispers that Marcus Reed has been asking unusual questions, quiet inquiries about the origin of certain documents." Nathan's stomach tightened at the mention of the loyal military officer. If Marcus was investigating on the king's orders, it meant Ethan himself harbored suspicions that could unravel everything Nathan had carefully constructed. "Keep me informed of anything further you learn," Nathan instructed, pressing several coins into Felix's palm before hurrying back toward the palace, his mind racing through possible ways to protect himself should the truth eventually come to light. As autumn deepened across both the Ashwood Kingdom and Adrian's territory, 2 separate stories continued moving steadily toward a collision neither Clara nor Ethan could yet fully anticipate, each shaped by growing evidence, growing suspicion, and the quiet, steady consequences of choices made in haste and desperation months earlier. The stable hand froze mid-sentence when Marcus Reed stepped out from behind the wooden post, his expression firm but not unkind. "You have already told me what you witnessed once," Marcus said quietly. "I need you to tell it again, carefully, and this time I need you to sign a written statement confirming it." The young man, named Wesley, glanced nervously toward the palace walls in the distance, clearly fearful of what might happen should Advisor Cole learn of his involvement. "If he discovers I spoke to you, sir, I fear for my safety." "You have my word that your safety will be protected," Marcus said. "But the kingdom needs the truth, and right now, you are one of the few people who witnessed something important. Please, tell me exactly what you saw that evening." Wesley took a steadying breath before continuing. "I saw Advisor Cole meeting with a stranger near the eastern stables, several days before the letter was presented to the court. They spoke quietly, and I saw the advisor hand the man a folded parchment along with a pouch that looked heavy with coin. I did not think much of it at the time, sir. Advisors often meet with various visitors. It was only after the Queen's banishment that I began to wonder if what I witnessed carried greater significance. Marcus carefully recorded every detail Wesley provided, along with a rough description of the stranger's appearance, before thanking the young man and instructing him to remain silent about their conversation until further notice. Armed with this new statement, along with the evidence regarding the palace parchment stock, Marcus returned to King Ethan's private study, where the king had been anxiously awaiting any further developments in the investigation. I believe we now have sufficient evidence to formally question Advisor Cole, Marcus said, presenting the written statement along with his other findings. Ethan read through the documents carefully, his expression darkening with each line. The picture forming before him was undeniable. Nathan Cole had orchestrated Clara's banishment through deliberate forgery, likely motivated by a desire to increase his own influence over the throne, once the Queen's steady presence was removed from court. "Bring him to me," Ethan said, his voice cold with barely restrained anger. Quietly, without alerting the rest of the court. "I want answers before this becomes public knowledge." Marcus departed immediately to carry out the king's orders, while Ethan remained alone, staring once again at Clara's old ledger, feeling the full weight of his mistake, pressing down upon him with renewed intensity. When Nathan arrived at the private study sometime later, summoned under the pretense of discussing routine kingdom matters, he found King Ethan waiting with an expression far colder than any he had encountered in recent months. "Your Majesty," Nathan began, "you wish to see me regarding." "Tell me about the man you met near the eastern stables," Ethan interrupted, his voice low and controlled despite the fury building within him. "The one you paid to forge a letter implicating my wife in treason she never committed." Nathan's face paled instantly, though he attempted to maintain his composure. "I do not know what you are referring to, Your Majesty. I would never—" "Do not lie to me further," Ethan said, slamming his palm against the desk with enough force to make Nathan flinch visibly. "I have witnesses. I have evidence. I know the parchment came from this very palace, accessible only to senior advisors. I know you met privately with a stranger days before. That letter conveniently appeared. The truth is already clear to me, Nathan. What remains uncertain is whether you will confess honestly, or whether I must extract the full truth through less pleasant means." Nathan's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, his shoulders sagging as the weight of discovery settled upon him. "Your Majesty, please understand. Everything I did believing it served the kingdom's best interests. Queen Clara's growing influence over trade decisions, over military strategy, it was becoming excessive for someone who was never meant to hold true power within this court. I feared she was positioning herself to eventually challenge your own authority." "That was never true," Ethan said, his voice shaking now with a mixture of grief and rage. "She served this kingdom faithfully, more faithfully than you ever did, and you destroyed her reputation, her home, her entire life, based on nothing more than your own paranoid ambitions." "Your Majesty, Guards," Ethan called out, and 2 soldiers entered immediately, having waited just outside the study door for this very moment. "Take Advisor Cole into custody. He will be held pending a full trial before the court, where his crimes will be exposed publicly, exactly as he once exposed false crimes against an innocent woman." As the guards led Nathan away, his protests growing increasingly desperate, Ethan remained alone in his study, staring at the empty space where his former advisor had stood only moments earlier. The truth he had feared, and yet somehow already known deep within himself, was now fully confirmed. Clara had been innocent all along. He had banished the woman who had served his kingdom faithfully, who had built genuine trust among the people, all because he had allowed suspicion and pride to override the trust they had built together over 3 years of marriage. Grace arrived at his study sometime later, having heard whispers already spreading through the palace regarding Advisor Cole's sudden arrest. "Your Majesty, is it true? Has the truth finally come to light?" "It is true," Ethan confirmed, his voice heavy with regret. "Clara was innocent. I banished her based on lies, and I did not even pause long enough to properly question the evidence before passing judgment." Grace's eyes filled with tears, relief and grief mixing together in equal measure. "What will you do now, Your Majesty?" Ethan considered the question carefully, aware that there was no simple answer, no quick solution that could undo months of pain and separation. "I need to find her," he finally said. "I need to make this right, though I fear no apology will ever be sufficient for what I have taken from her." "Where would she have gone?" Grace asked. "I do not know," Ethan admitted, "but I intend to find out, regardless of how long the search may take." Over the following days, Ethan quietly dispatched trusted scouts throughout the kingdom and beyond, instructing them to search for any word of a woman matching Clara's description, careful to avoid drawing public attention to the search given the sensitive nature of the situation. He knew that revealing the full truth too quickly, before Clara could be found and properly informed, risked creating chaos within the court, particularly given Nathan's remaining allies who might attempt to protect their fallen advisor through political maneuvering. Meanwhile, preparations began for Nathan's formal trial, a proceeding that would need to be conducted carefully to ensure the full truth was exposed, without further complications. Marcus continued gathering additional evidence, including testimony from Victor, the forger, who was eventually located and convinced, through a combination of leniency promises and firm pressure, to confirm the full details of Nathan's scheme. As the investigation solidified and as scouts began fanning out across the kingdom's borders, Ethan found himself spending long hours in Clara's old chambers, now left untouched since her departure. He studied her belongings, the books she had left behind, small personal items that offered glimpses into the woman he had failed to truly understand until it was seemingly too late. Among her belongings, he discovered a small journal, its pages filled with private thoughts she had never shared with him directly. He hesitated before opening it, aware that reading her private reflections without her permission felt like yet another violation of trust. But his need to understand her, to finally see the full picture of the woman he had wronged so deeply, ultimately overcame his hesitation. Within its pages, he found entries describing her genuine affection for the kingdom's people, her careful strategies for improving conditions in the lower villages, and occasional entries reflecting on her marriage to him, entries that revealed a woman who had genuinely hoped their arranged partnership might grow into something deeper, something built on mutual respect, and perhaps even love, despite the political nature of their initial union. One entry in particular struck him deeply, written several months before her banishment. She had described a quiet evening they had spent together discussing trade negotiations, noting with quiet hope that perhaps Ethan was finally beginning to see her as a true partner, rather than simply a political arrangement forced upon him by circumstance. Reading her private hopes he had unknowingly crushed through his hasty judgment and misplaced trust in Nathan's false counsel, Ethan felt a grief unlike anything he had previously experienced, a grief made sharper by the knowledge that his own actions had directly caused such unnecessary suffering to someone who had only ever tried to serve him and his kingdom faithfully. He closed the journal carefully, setting it back exactly where he had found it, and made a silent vow to himself that regardless of how long the search might take, regardless of what challenges lay ahead, he would find Clara, confess his failures honestly, and attempt, however imperfectly, to make right the profound wrong he had committed against her. Whether she would ever be willing to forgive him, whether their story might find any path toward reconciliation, remained entirely uncertain. But for the first time since her banishment, Ethan felt a clear sense of purpose guiding his actions, a determination to pursue truth and redemption, regardless of how difficult that path might prove to be. Victor, the forger, was eventually located in a small border town, having spent much of the coin Nathan had paid him on drink and lodging while he waited for enough time to pass before disappearing entirely. Marcus and two soldiers approached him quietly at a tavern, making clear that cooperation would be treated far more favorably than continued silence. "I only did what I was paid to do," Victor said nervously, once he understood the seriousness of the situation surrounding him. "Advisor Cole approached me nearly a month before the letter was presented. He provided a sample of the Queen's handwriting, taken from old correspondence, and asked me to create a document detailing false information about the kingdom's defenses, along with a forged seal matching her personal mark. Will you testify to this before the king in his court?" Marcus asked. Victor hesitated only briefly before nodding. "If it means avoiding harsher punishment for my own role in this, yes, I will testify." With Victor's confession secured, along with Wesley's witness statement and the physical evidence regarding the palace parchment, the case against Nathan Cole became undeniable. Preparations for the formal trial moved forward steadily, while Ethan's scouts continued their search across the kingdom's borders and beyond, following whispered rumors of a skilled healer who had appeared in various towns over recent weeks. One scout, a quiet and observant man named Peter, eventually followed a trail of grateful merchant testimonials toward Millbrook, having heard stories from travelers about a remarkable healer who had saved a young girl's life when local physicians had given up hope. When he arrived in the town, however, he discovered that the healer known as Elowen had recently departed toward the Eastern Territories, called away to assist with an outbreak of illness in Lord Voss's lands. Peter sent an urgent message back to the palace detailing his findings, careful to avoid drawing attention to his inquiries, given the sensitive nature of his mission. When the message reached Ethan, he felt a surge of cautious hope mixed with fresh concern. Clara had survived, had thrived even, building a new identity and a new purpose for herself in the months since her banishment, but she had also moved beyond his immediate reach, now residing within territory governed by another Alpha Lord entirely. "Send word ahead quietly," Ethan instructed Peter through a return message. "I wish to travel to Lord Voss's territory myself, though I do not yet wish my true purpose known publicly. Arrange appropriate lodging, and inform Lord Voss only that a matter of importance requires my personal attention within his lands." As these arrangements began taking shape within Adrian's territory, Clara continued her work treating the remaining patients affected by the contaminated well water, gradually restoring health throughout the town, while also finding herself increasingly drawn into deeper conversations with Adrian himself during quiet evenings after her daily rounds were completed. "You carry yourself differently than most healers I have encountered," Adrian observed one evening, as they shared a simple meal following a long day of treating patients. "There is an education behind your knowledge that goes beyond simple herbal remedies passed down through informal apprenticeship. Where did you first learn such skills?" Clara considered how much of the truth she was willing to share. "I studied under several skilled healers during my younger years, in various regions, before circumstances eventually led me toward a very different life for a time. It is only recently that I have returned to the work I originally trained for." Adrian studied her carefully, sensing there remained significant details she was choosing not to share, though he respected the boundaries she had quietly established regarding her past. "Whatever that different life may have involved, I am grateful it eventually led you here. Your presence has made a genuine difference for my people. I am simply doing the work I feel called to do," Clara said softly. "Though I admit, I have found genuine peace in this life, more peace than I expected to find." Their conversation continued late into the evening, touching on matters of governance, of caring for common people, of the responsibilities that came with holding positions of influence and authority. Clara found herself impressed by Adrian's genuine dedication to fair leadership, a stark contrast to the political maneuvering and hidden agendas she had grown accustomed to within the Ashwood court. As autumn continued deepening around them, and as the last patients affected by the contaminated well finally recovered fully, Clara began considering whether her work within Adrian's territory was reaching its natural conclusion, whether it might soon be time to return to her quiet life in Millbrook, or perhaps to consider new possibilities she had not previously imagined for her future. She did not yet know that within days, her carefully rebuilt life would once again intersect unexpectedly with the past she had worked so hard to leave behind, as King Ethan's quiet journey toward Adrian's territory drew steadily closer with each passing hour. Horses thundered across the border road as King Ethan's small traveling party approached the outer edge of Adrian Voss's territory, moving faster than protocol typically allowed for a king traveling into another lord's lands. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should slow our pace," suggested one of his guards, clearly uneasy about arriving so hastily and without proper announcement. "Lord Voss may consider our urgency an insult to his territory's sovereignty." "I am aware of the risk," Ethan replied, though he did not slow his horse. "But every day that passes is a day Clara remains unaware that her innocence has been proven, a day she continues believing her own kingdom condemned her unjustly without cause." The guard said nothing further, understanding that his king's determination would not be easily swayed. They continued forward, finally reaching the main settlement by early afternoon, where Adrian himself had already been informed of their approach through Peter's earlier message. Adrian met them at the edge of town, his expression carefully neutral despite his evident curiosity regarding the unusual circumstances of this visit. "Your Majesty," he said, offering the formal bow expected between allied territories, "this is an unexpected honor. Your message mentioned a matter of importance requiring your personal attention within my lands." "Lord Voss," Ethan replied, dismounting from his horse, "I apologize for the abruptness of this visit. The matter I must address is personal rather than political, though I understand it may still require your patience and discretion." Adrian studied him carefully, sensing genuine urgency beneath the king's carefully controlled exterior. "Come, let us speak privately." They retreated to Adrian's modest but well-appointed study, where Ethan finally allowed himself to explain the full situation: the forged letter, Nathan's betrayal, Clara's wrongful banishment, and his desperate search to locate her since learning the truth. Adrian listened carefully, his expression growing increasingly troubled as the story unfolded. When Ethan finished speaking, Adrian remained silent for a long moment, processing the implications of what he had just learned. "The healer known as Elowin," Adrian finally said, "the woman who has spent recent weeks treating an illness among my own people, saving numerous lives through her remarkable skill and knowledge. You believe she is your former queen? I believe it is highly likely, Ethan confirmed. Everything matches, her healing knowledge, the timing of her arrival in this region, even small details in the descriptions my scouts have gathered. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, an unreadable expression crossing his features. She has never once mentioned any connection to royal circles. She has presented herself simply as a skilled healer seeking a quiet, purposeful life. I imagine she has good reason to keep such details private, Ethan said, given how badly her own kingdom failed her. Adrian considered this for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting emotions regarding the revelation. He had grown to deeply respect the woman he knew as Elowen over recent weeks, admiring not only her healing skills but her quiet strength, her humility, her genuine dedication to helping others regardless of personal recognition or reward. Learning that she was, in fact, a banished queen added layers of complexity he had not anticipated when agreeing to help arrange this meeting. She deserves to hear this truth directly from you, Your Majesty, Adrian finally said. Though I must tell you honestly, I do not know how she will receive it. She has built a peaceful life here, free from whatever pain her previous circumstances caused her. I would ask that you approach this conversation with patience and genuine humility, rather than simply expecting immediate reconciliation. I have no expectation of easy forgiveness, Ethan said quietly. I only hope for the opportunity to properly apologize, to ensure she understands the truth has finally come to light, and to offer whatever restitution might help repair even a small portion of the harm I have caused her. Adrian nodded slowly. Very well. I will arrange for you to see her, though I will not force this meeting upon her without her knowledge or consent. She deserves the choice of whether to face this conversation on her own terms. That evening, Adrian approached Clara privately in the small healing house where she had been finishing her final rounds among the recovering patients. His expression carried a seriousness she had not seen from him before, immediately putting her on alert. Elowen, he began carefully. There is something important I must discuss with you. Something that has arrived unexpectedly within my territory today. Clara set aside the herbs she had been sorting, giving him her full attention. What has happened? Adrian hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. King Ethan Ashwood has arrived here, seeking a woman matching your description, a woman he believes to be his former queen, wrongfully banished several months ago based on a forged letter and false accusations orchestrated by his own advisor. The color drained slowly from Clara's face as she processed his words. The careful life she had built, the identity she had constructed, suddenly threatened by the arrival of the very past she had worked so hard to leave behind. He knows I am here? She asked quietly. He suspects strongly, based on the healing work you have performed throughout this region, Adrian confirmed. He wishes to speak with you directly, though I have told him I would not force this conversation upon you without your consent. Clara sat down slowly, her mind racing through the implications of this sudden development. Part of her felt a fierce reluctance to reopen the painful chapter of her life she had worked so hard to move beyond. But another part of her, a part shaped by genuine curiosity and perhaps something resembling hope, wondered what exactly had happened to bring the truth to light after so many months of enforced silence and exile. Did he say what evidence proved my innocence? She finally asked. He mentioned a forged letter, an advisor's betrayal, witnesses who eventually came forward, Adrian explained. It seems the truth unraveled slowly over recent months, though I do not know all the specific details. Clara absorbed this information carefully, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and lingering anger at the months of exile she had endured due to a betrayal that had ultimately been proven false. I need time to consider whether I wish to speak with him, she finally said. Take whatever time you need, Adrian assured her. I have made clear to him that this choice belongs entirely to you. Clara spent that evening walking alone through the quiet fields surrounding the settlement, processing the whirlwind of emotions stirred by Adrian's revelation. She thought of the great hall where she had been publicly condemned, of Ethan's cold expression as he pronounced her banishment, of the smile she had given him as she walked away, a smile born from her own quiet certainty regarding her innocence, regardless of whether anyone else believed it at the time. She thought too of the life she had built since then, the genuine purpose she had found in her healing work, the peace she had discovered in living authentically as herself, rather than as a queen defined by political arrangement and courtly expectation. Whatever Ethan wished to say to her now, she realized, she no longer needed his validation or his apology to affirm her own worth. She had already discovered that truth entirely on her own, through months of quiet, purposeful living far from the palace that had once defined her entire existence. But she also recognized that avoiding this conversation entirely might leave important matters unresolved. particularly regarding whatever consequences Nathan Cole's betrayal might still carry for the kingdom's future stability. As dawn approached, following a long night of careful reflection, Clara finally reached a decision. She would speak with Ethan, not out of any lingering need for his approval, but simply to close this chapter of her life properly, on her own terms, with the same calm strength that had carried her through her banishment months earlier. She sent word to Adrian the following morning, informing him of her decision. Adrian relayed the message to Ethan, arranging for the conversation to take place that same afternoon, within the quiet privacy of the Healing House garden, away from the curious eyes of the wider settlement. As the appointed hour approached, Clara found herself surprisingly calm, far calmer than she might have expected given the significance of the impending conversation. She had spent months rebuilding her sense of self entirely separate from her former role as queen, and she intended to enter this conversation as that same strong, self-assured woman, rather than reverting to the uncertain, hopeful bride she had once been within the Ashwood court. Whatever Ethan had come to say, she would listen with an open mind, but she would not allow his words, whether apology or explanation, to diminish the strength and independence she had worked so hard to reclaim, since the day he had cast her out of the only home she had known. That same night, Ethan lay awake in the modest guest quarters Adrian had provided, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling as sleep refused to come. He thought of every possible way the coming conversation might unfold, rehearsing apologies in his mind that all felt inadequate against the scale of what he had taken from her. He thought of the years before their marriage, when he had first learned that his council intended to arrange a political union with a healer from a modest noble family, a match designed purely to strengthen trade alliances along the southern border. He remembered his initial resistance to the arrangement, his belief that a king should choose his own partner rather than accept one selected for political convenience. Yet Clara had surprised him from their very first meeting. She had arrived at court not with nervous uncertainty, but with quiet confidence and genuine curiosity about the kingdom she was about to join. She had asked thoughtful questions about the well-being of the common people, questions none of his previous advisors had ever prioritized. Slowly, over months and then years, he had come to respect her, then to rely on her judgment, and eventually, though he had never fully admitted it even to himself, to care for her far more deeply than the political nature of their union had ever required. He thought of the night Nathan first brought him whispered concerns about Clara's growing influence, subtle suggestions that she might be overstepping the boundaries expected of a queen consort. He realized now, with painful clarity, how skillfully Nathan had planted seeds of doubt over many months, preparing the ground carefully before finally presenting the forged letter as damning proof of betrayal. He had been so quick to believe it. That truth troubled him more than almost anything else. He had known Clara for 3 years, had witnessed her tireless dedication to the kingdom's well-being, and yet the moment Nathan presented seemingly damning evidence, he had chosen suspicion over the trust they had carefully built together. He had chosen his own pride, his fear of appearing weak before the court, over the woman who had never given him genuine reason to doubt her loyalty. Sleep finally came sometime near dawn, brief and restless, filled with fragmented images of Clara's calm smile as she walked away from him, a smile he now understood far better than he had on the day he witnessed it. Meanwhile, back within the Ashwood kingdom, preparations for Nathan Cole's formal trial continued steadily under Marcus Reed's careful oversight. Word had begun spreading quietly through the court that the former advisor stood accused of orchestrating the Queen's wrongful banishment, and the reactions among the nobility proved sharply divided. Some expressed genuine shock and outrage, recalling Clara's evident dedication to the kingdom during her years as queen, now recognizing the injustice she had suffered. Others, who had benefited from Nathan's political maneuvering or who had simply distrusted Clara's foreign origins from the start, remained skeptical, questioning whether the evidence against the advisor might itself be exaggerated or politically motivated. Marcus worked diligently to ensure the evidence presented would be beyond question, gathering additional testimony from palace staff who had witnessed Nathan's suspicious behavior in the weeks leading up to the letter's discovery, alongside the confirmed statements from both Wesley and Victor. He understood that a fair, thoroughly documented trial would be essential, not only for delivering justice to Nathan, but for fully restoring Clara's reputation should she ever choose to return to the kingdom, or even simply to clear her name from a distance. Grace, meanwhile, found herself increasingly restless as she awaited news from Peter's search efforts. She had served Clara faithfully for years, and the guilt she felt over not speaking up sooner regarding her suspicions about the forged letter continued to weigh heavily on her conscience, despite Ethan's reassurances that her eventual honesty had been instrumental in uncovering the full truth. "Do you think she will ever forgive the kingdom for what was done to her?" Grace asked Marcus one afternoon as they discussed the ongoing preparations for the trial. I cannot speak for what is in her heart, Marcus replied honestly. But I do believe the king intends to make amends as thoroughly as circumstances allow, regardless of whether forgiveness follows. Some wrongs require correction simply because they are wrong, not because we expect gratitude or reconciliation in return. Grace nodded slowly, finding some measure of comfort in his words, even as she continued hoping for a resolution that might restore some of what had been lost during the painful months since Clara's departure. Back within Adrian's territory, as the appointed hour for Clara and Ethan's conversation drew steadily closer, Adrian found himself reflecting on his own complicated feelings regarding the unfolding situation. He had grown to genuinely admire Elowen, or Clara, as he now understood her true identity to be, valuing not only her healing skills but the quiet strength and integrity she demonstrated in every interaction he had witnessed. Learning of her royal past, and of the genuine wrong committed against her, stirred within him a protective instinct he had not fully anticipated. He found himself hoping that whatever emerged from her conversation with Ethan, she would ultimately choose a path that honored her own well-being and happiness, rather than simply returning to a role in a kingdom that had failed to protect her when it mattered most. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the Healing House garden where their conversation would soon take place, both Clara and Ethan prepared themselves, in their own separate ways, for a reunion that neither could fully predict, but that both understood carried profound significance for whatever future lay ahead. Clara stood perfectly still at the edge of the garden, watching as Ethan approached, his familiar footsteps slower and more hesitant than she had ever witnessed from him before. He stopped several paces away, as though uncertain how close he was permitted to come. For a long moment neither spoke, the weight of months of separation and betrayal hanging heavily in the space between them. Clara, he finally said, his voice rougher than she remembered, carrying an emotion she had rarely heard from him during their years together. I do not know where to begin. Begin with the truth, she said simply, her tone steady despite the storm of emotion churning beneath her calm exterior. That is all I have ever asked of anyone. Ethan nodded slowly, drawing a steadying breath before continuing. The letter that condemned you was forged. Nathan Cole orchestrated the entire scheme, paying a forger to create false evidence implicating you in treason you never committed. He believed your growing influence within the court threatened his own position, and rather than confronting you directly, he chose to destroy you through lies. Clara absorbed his words carefully, feeling a complex wave of vindication mixed with fresh anger at the sheer scale of the betrayal that had cost her everything. And you believed him without question, she said, not as an accusation exactly, but as a simple statement of fact that needed acknowledging. I did, Ethan admitted, unable to meet her gaze for a moment. I allowed my pride, my fear of appearing weak before the court, to override 3 years of trust we had built together. I should have demanded more thorough investigation before passing judgment. I should have trusted my own knowledge of your character over the convenient evidence Nathan presented. I failed you completely, Clara, and I understand if that failure is beyond forgiveness. Clara studied him for a long moment, taking in the genuine remorse evident in his expression, remorse that seemed far more authentic than the cold, decisive king who had condemned her in that great hall months earlier. Why are you here, Ethan? What exactly do you hope to accomplish with this conversation? I came because you deserve to know the truth, he said. I came because I could not continue living with the knowledge that you remained in exile, believing your own kingdom had abandoned you unjustly, without at least attempting to make this right. Nathan has been arrested. He will face trial for his crimes. Your innocence will be publicly declared, and if you wish to return, your title and position await you, restored fully and without condition. And if I do not wish to return? Clara asked quietly. Ethan's expression flickered with something that looked like pain, though he composed himself quickly. Then I will respect that choice, difficult as it would be for me to accept. I have no right to demand anything further from you, Clara, not after everything I have already taken from you. Clara turned away slightly, gazing out over the quiet garden as she processed the weight of this unexpected reunion. Do you understand what these past months have meant to me, Ethan? I lost my home, my title, my entire identity within that court, all in a single afternoon based on lies I never had the chance to properly defend myself against. And yet, in losing all of that, I discovered something I had never truly possessed while wearing your crown. What is that? Ethan asked softly. Myself, Clara said simply. For 3 years, I existed primarily as Queen Clara, wife to King Ethan Ashwood, a role defined entirely by political arrangement and courtly expectation. When you banished me, cruel as that moment was, It forced me to discover who I am, when I am not simply reacting to the demands of a crown I never truly chose for myself. I found genuine purpose in my healing work. I found people who value me for my actual skills and character, rather than for the title I happen to hold. Ethan listened carefully, recognizing the profound truth in her words, along with the growing realization that whatever apology he offered, it could not simply erase the genuine growth and self-discovery she had experienced during her exile, regardless of how unjustly that exile had been imposed upon her. I am not asking you to abandon everything you have built here, Ethan said carefully. I am simply asking whether there might be room, eventually, for some form of reconciliation between us, whatever shape that might ultimately take. Clara considered his words for a long moment, weighing the genuine remorse she sensed within him against the very real pain and injustice she had endured because of his hasty judgment. I need time, Ethan, she finally said. I cannot simply return to being the queen I once was, not after everything that has happened, not after discovering the strength and purpose I have found in this new life. Whatever reconciliation might eventually be possible between us, it cannot happen quickly, and it cannot happen on the assumption that I will simply resume my old role without genuine change on your part as well. What kind of change do you require? Ethan asked, genuine humility evident in his tone. I require a king who trusts his own judgment over the convenient whispers of advisors seeking personal gain, Clara said firmly. I require a partner who values my voice and my contributions as genuinely as he values his own authority. I required these things 3 years ago as well, Ethan, though I did not always demand them clearly enough. I will not make that same mistake again, regardless of what path our story ultimately takes. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight and validity of her requirements. I understand. I will not pressure you for an immediate decision. Take whatever time you need, Clara. I will remain patient, and I will work to become the kind of leader and the kind of partner who genuinely deserves your trust, regardless of whether that effort ultimately leads to reconciliation between us. Their conversation continued for some time longer, touching on the details of Nathan's upcoming trial, the current state of the kingdom, and the changes Ethan had already begun implementing to prevent similar injustices from occurring in the future. Gradually, the tension between them eased slightly, replaced by a cautious, tentative civility that acknowledged the significant work still required before any true healing could occur. As the sun began setting behind the western hills, casting the garden in soft golden light, Ethan finally prepared to take his leave, understanding that pushing further at this delicate moment would only undermine whatever fragile progress their conversation had achieved. Thank you for speaking with me, he said quietly, and for the honesty you have shown, even when I clearly did not deserve such consideration. I speak honestly, because it is who I am, Clara replied. Regardless of how others have treated me, I will not abandon my own principles in response to their failures. Ethan departed shortly afterward, returning to Adrian's guest quarters with a heart considerably heavier than when he had arrived, yet also carrying a fragile thread of hope he had not fully expected to find within their difficult conversation. Clara had not rejected him outright. She had not demanded he leave and never return. She had simply asked for time, for genuine change, for a relationship built on equality and trust rather than convenient political arrangement. It was, he recognized, far more grace than he likely deserved, and he intended to honor that grace by proving himself worthy of whatever chance she might eventually be willing to offer him. Meanwhile, Clara remained alone in the quiet garden long after Ethan's departure, processing the whirlwind of emotions their conversation had stirred within her. She felt no regret over the boundaries she had established, no uncertainty regarding her own worth or the validity of her requirements for any future reconciliation. But she also recognized, with quiet surprise, that some small part of her felt genuine relief at finally confronting the truth directly, at finally hearing Ethan acknowledge his failures honestly, rather than continuing to hide behind the cold authority of his throne. Whatever came next, whether reconciliation, continued separation, or some entirely different path she had not yet considered, Clara understood that she now approached her future from a position of genuine strength, shaped by months of hard-won independence and self-discovery that no crown, however powerful, could ever fully take away from her again. Adrian found her still sitting in the garden as darkness settled fully over the settlement, having deliberately given her space throughout the afternoon, while remaining close enough to be available should she need him. He approached quietly, careful not to intrude if she preferred solitude, though his concern for her well-being outweighed his hesitation. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share," he said gently, settling onto the stone bench beside her. "But I wanted you to know I am here, whatever you might need." Clara offered him a tired but genuine smile. Thank you, Adrian. The conversation was difficult, though perhaps not as painful as I had feared it might be. Did he explain everything? Adrian asked carefully. He did, Clara confirmed. His advisor orchestrated the entire scheme against me. Nathan Cole has been arrested, and my innocence will apparently be publicly declared throughout the kingdom. Adrian nodded slowly, processing this information alongside his own complicated feelings about the revelation of her true identity and the reunion he had just witnessed unfold within his own territory. And what did he ask of you? He asked whether reconciliation might eventually be possible between us, Clara said honestly. I told him I needed time, that I required genuine change on his part before I could consider returning to my previous role. And how do you feel about that request? Adrian asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the genuine curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, underlying his question. Clara considered the question thoughtfully before answering. I do not know yet, Adrian. Part of me remains angry about everything that was taken from me so unjustly. Another part of me recognizes that Ethan seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely different from the cold king who condemned me in that hall months ago. I need time to understand my own feelings before I can offer any clear answer, either to him or to myself. Adrian absorbed her words carefully, aware of the growing feelings he had developed toward her over recent weeks, feelings he had not fully acknowledged even to himself, until witnessing the possibility of her potential return to the Ashwood Kingdom. He recognized with quiet clarity that pressing his own feelings upon her now, amid such significant uncertainty in her life, would be both unfair and premature. Whatever you decide, he said carefully, know that you are always welcome within my territory, regardless of whatever choice you ultimately make regarding your former kingdom. The people here have grown to deeply value your presence, myself included. Clara studied him for a moment, sensing something meaningful beneath his carefully measured words, though she chose not to press further given the emotional weight already surrounding her that evening. Thank you, Adrian. Your friendship has meant more to me than you likely realize, especially during these past weeks of unexpected upheaval. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, each processing their own thoughts regarding the significant changes unfolding around them, before eventually returning to their respective quarters as the night grew fully dark around the quiet settlement. The following morning, Ethan prepared to depart back toward the Ashwood Kingdom, understanding that Nathan's trial required his presence, and that pressing Clara further at this delicate stage would only undermine the fragile progress achieved through their difficult conversation. Before leaving, he sought out Adrian for a brief private exchange. Thank you for your hospitality, Lord Voss, Ethan said, and for your evident care regarding Clara's well-being throughout her time within your territory. Adrian studied the king carefully, sensing the underlying question beneath his formal gratitude. She has become someone I deeply respect and value, Your Majesty. Whatever path she ultimately chooses, I hope it is one that brings her genuine happiness, whether that happiness lies within your kingdom or elsewhere. Ethan absorbed the subtle challenge within Adrian's carefully measured words, recognizing that this territorial lord had developed feelings toward Clara that extended beyond simple friendship or professional respect. A flicker of something resembling jealousy stirred within him, though he forced himself to remain composed, aware that he had no rightful claim to demand exclusivity over Clara's future affections, not after the profound betrayal he had already inflicted upon her. I hope for the same thing, Ethan said carefully, though the tension between the two men remained evident beneath their polite exchange. Regardless of what she ultimately decides, I intend to prove myself worthy of whatever consideration she might eventually offer me. With that, Ethan departed, his traveling party moving at a more measured pace than their urgent journey days earlier, back toward the Ashwood Kingdom and the trial that awaited his return, while behind him, within Adrian's quiet territory, the seeds of an unexpected rivalry had begun taking root, one that would only grow more complex as the weeks ahead unfolded. The great hall of the Ashwood Palace fell into stunned silence as Nathan Cole was led forward in chains, the very same room where he had once stood proudly beside the throne, orchestrating Clara's downfall with calculated precision. King Ethan sat upon his throne, his expression composed despite the storm of emotions he carried regarding this moment of long-delayed justice. Marcus Reed stood ready with the full collection of evidence gathered over recent weeks, while Grace watched nervously from among the gathered court, still carrying guilt over her own delayed honesty months earlier. Nathan Cole, Ethan began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. You stand accused of forging documents to falsely implicate Queen Clara Bennett in treason, resulting in her wrongful banishment from this kingdom. How do you answer these charges? Nathan's composure had crumbled significantly since his arrest, weeks of confinement having stripped away the confident arrogance he once carried so easily. Your Majesty, I acted believing I protected the kingdom from undue influence, nothing more. Present the evidence, Ethan instructed, and Marcus stepped forward, methodically laying out the testimony from Victor the forger, the witness statement from Wesley the stable hand, and the physical evidence connecting the parchment to palace supplies accessible only to senior advisors. As each piece of evidence was presented before the court, murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the assembled nobility. Many recalled Clara's genuine dedication to the kingdom during her years as queen, now recognizing with growing horror the depth of injustice she had suffered due to Nathan's calculated betrayal. The evidence is undeniable, Ethan finally declared, once all testimony had been presented. Nathan Cole, you deliberately forged evidence against an innocent woman, motivated by your own ambitions for greater influence within this court. Your actions caused profound and unjust suffering to someone who served this kingdom faithfully. For these crimes, you are stripped of all titles and positions within this court, and you will be exiled from Ashwood lands, never to return. Nathan's shoulders sagged as the sentence was pronounced, understanding that his carefully constructed ambitions had collapsed entirely, replaced by a future defined by disgrace and isolation. As guards led him from the hall, murmurs of relief and vindication spread among those gathered, many expressing quiet hope that Queen Clara might someday return to reclaim the position so unjustly taken from her. Following the trial's conclusion, Ethan addressed the full court directly, making a formal public declaration regarding Clara's complete innocence, ensuring that the truth would be known throughout the kingdom and beyond, restoring whatever reputation had been damaged by the false accusations months earlier. Let it be known throughout this kingdom, he declared, that Queen Clara Bennett was innocent of all charges brought against her. She served this kingdom with unwavering dedication and integrity, and the injustice she suffered rests entirely upon my own failure to properly investigate, before passing judgment, and upon the deliberate deception orchestrated by Nathan Cole. Should she choose to return, she will be welcomed with the full honor and respect she has always deserved. The declaration spread quickly throughout the kingdom, carried by messengers and travelers alike, eventually reaching even the distant territories where Clara had rebuilt her life over recent months. Word of her vindication brought fresh attention to her healing work, with grateful patience throughout the region now speaking openly of the remarkable woman who had once worn a crown before being unjustly cast aside. Meanwhile, within Adrian's territory, Clara continued processing the significant developments of recent weeks, torn between the genuine relief of her public vindication and the complicated question of what her future should now hold. She had received word of Nathan's trial and sentencing through Adrian, who continued to support her through this uncertain period with quiet patience and genuine care. You seem troubled, Adrian observed one evening, as they shared their usual meal following a day spent treating patients throughout the settlement. I am uncertain what comes next, Clara admitted. My innocence has been publicly declared. My title Theoretica awaits my return, should I choose to accept it. And yet I find myself genuinely uncertain whether returning to that life is truly what I want, regardless of whatever changes Ethan might have made in recent weeks. What does your heart tell you? Adrian asked gently. Clara considered the question carefully. My heart tells me that I have found genuine purpose and peace in this new life. Purpose that has nothing to do with crowns or titles, and everything to do with the direct, meaningful impact I can have on people's lives through my healing work. I am uncertain whether returning to court, regardless of Ethan's efforts toward change, could ever offer that same sense of authentic purpose. Adrian listened carefully, recognizing an opportunity within her words, though he remained cautious about pressing his own feelings too forcefully, given the significant uncertainty still surrounding her decision. You know that you are always welcome to continue your work here, within my territory, regardless of whatever official title or position you might hold, or choose not to hold. Clara smiled genuinely at his words, appreciating the quiet support he continued offering without ever demanding anything in return. Your friendship has meant a great deal to me, Adrian, throughout everything that has happened these past months. It is more than friendship for me, Adrian finally admitted, unable to hold back the truth any longer. I have grown to care for you deeply, Clara, not simply as the skilled healer known throughout this region, but as the remarkable woman you are, regardless of whatever crown you once wore, or might someday choose to reclaim. Clara felt a flutter of surprise at his direct admission, though not entirely unexpected given the growing warmth she had sensed building between them over recent weeks. Adrian, you do not need to respond immediately, Adrian interrupted gently. I understand you carry significant uncertainty regarding your future, and I do not wish to add unnecessary pressure to an already complicated situation. I simply wanted you to know my true feelings, regardless of whatever path you ultimately choose. Clara appreciated his honesty and his evident respect for her need to process this significant decision without external pressure complicating her judgment further. Thank you for your honesty, Adrian. I need time to consider everything, my feelings toward you, my feelings toward Ethan and the kingdom I once called home, and most importantly, what I genuinely want for my own future, separate from anyone else's expectations or desires. Take whatever time you need, Adrian said sincerely. I will remain here, ready to support you regardless of what you ultimately decide. As the days passed following this significant conversation, Clara found herself increasingly reflective, walking often through the quiet fields surrounding the settlement, weighing the various paths now open before her. She thought of the genuine growth she had experienced since her banishment, the strength and independence she had discovered within herself, qualities she was determined not to sacrifice regardless of whatever choice she ultimately made. She thought of Ethan's genuine remorse during their conversation weeks earlier, his willingness to change, his public declaration restoring her reputation throughout the kingdom. She thought too of Adrian's quiet, steady support throughout her time within his territory, his genuine respect for her autonomy, his evident care that had grown into something deeper over recent weeks. Neither path offered an easy or obvious answer. Returning to Ashwood meant reclaiming her former title and status, but also returning to a court still recovering from Nathan's betrayal, still adjusting to whatever changes Ethan had implemented in his leadership. Remaining within Adrian's territory offered continued peace and purpose, along with the possibility of a new relationship built on mutual respect and shared values, but it also meant fully abandoning the identity and responsibilities she had once held as queen. As autumn gave way to the first signs of approaching winter, Clara understood that she could not delay her decision indefinitely. Both Ethan and Adrian deserved clarity regarding her intentions, and she herself needed to commit fully to whatever path she ultimately chose, rather than remaining suspended indefinitely between two possible futures. She began quietly preparing herself for the difficult decision that lay ahead, recognizing that whatever she ultimately chose would need to be based entirely on her own authentic desires and values, rather than on external pressure or expectation from either man who now sought her favor, or from the kingdom that had once claimed her loyalty before so unjustly casting her aside. Back within the Ashwood kingdom, Ethan faced mounting challenges that made clear just how significant Clara's quiet influence had truly been during her years as queen. The southern farmlands, neglected during months of administrative confusion following her departure, continued struggling to recover, with several villages reporting shortages that threatened a difficult winter ahead. Trade negotiations with neighboring territories, once handled with Clara's careful diplomacy, had grown increasingly strained under the clumsy efforts of officials unfamiliar with her methods. One important agreement regarding shared water rights along the eastern border nearly collapsed entirely, requiring Ethan's direct and urgent intervention to prevent lasting damage to the kingdom's relationships with its neighbors. "We need someone who understands these negotiations the way she did," Marcus observed during one particularly difficult council meeting, as ministers argued over how best to address the water rights dispute. "I am aware of that," Ethan replied, frustration evident in his tone, though directed more at himself than at his advisors. "I allowed myself to overlook how much of the kingdom's stability depended on her quiet efforts behind the scenes. I will not make that same mistake again, regardless of whether she ultimately chooses to return." Determined to prove his genuine commitment to change, Ethan began implementing new policies designed to prevent similar injustices from occurring in the future. He established a formal review process requiring multiple independent sources of evidence before any accusation against a member of the court could proceed to formal judgment, ensuring that no single advisor could again manipulate the king's trust as Nathan had done. He also began personally reviewing the ledgers and notes Clara had left behind, using her careful documentation to guide his own efforts toward addressing the southern farmland's struggles and repairing the strained diplomatic relationships that had suffered during her absence. Slowly, methodically, he worked to demonstrate through consistent action, rather than simple words, that he had genuinely learned from his profound failure months earlier. Grace, observing these changes with quiet approval, found herself gradually forgiving her own earlier hesitation in speaking up about the forged letter, recognizing that the king's genuine efforts toward reform offered some measure of redemption for the collective failures that had led to Clara's wrongful banishment. "You have changed significantly these past weeks, Your Majesty," Grace observed one afternoon as she assisted with organizing correspondence related to the ongoing diplomatic repairs. "I have tried to," Ethan replied honestly, "though I recognize that genuine change is proven through sustained effort over time, not through a few weeks of determined activity following a moment of crisis. I intend to continue this work regardless of whether Clara ultimately chooses to return, because it is simply the right way to lead this kingdom, not merely a strategy to win back her favor. As winter approached and the immediate crises within the kingdom gradually began stabilizing under Ethan's more attentive leadership, word continued reaching him periodically regarding Clara's activities within Adrian's territory, carried through Peter's ongoing discreet observations and occasional messages exchanged between the two territories regarding routine diplomatic matters. He learned, through these indirect channels, of the growing bond between Clara and Adrian, information that stirred within him a complicated mixture of respect for Adrian's evident good character and painful jealousy regarding the possibility that he had lost Clara's heart entirely to another man, regardless of whatever progress he made toward becoming a better king and a more worthy partner. Despite this painful uncertainty, Ethan remained committed to his path of genuine reform, understanding that regardless of Clara's ultimate decision, the changes he implemented were necessary and valuable in their own right, essential for ensuring the kingdom's continued stability, and for preventing future injustices from occurring against anyone else who might otherwise fall victim to similar political manipulation. He found himself, in quiet moments, praying not for Clara's return specifically, but simply for her genuine happiness, whatever form that happiness ultimately took, recognizing with humbling clarity that his own selfish desires had already cost her so much, and that true love, if he genuinely felt such a thing toward her, required prioritizing her well-being above his own hopes for reconciliation. This growing selflessness, though born from painful circumstances, represented perhaps the most significant transformation within Ethan since the day he had wrongfully cast Clara from his kingdom, a transformation that would ultimately prove crucial in shaping whatever outcome awaited them both as the winter season settled fully across both territories. Snow fell steadily across Adrian's territory, as Clara stood at her workroom window, watching the white flakes settle over the quiet settlement below, her mind still turning over the significant decision that continued to weigh upon her. Weeks had passed since Adrian's honest admission of his feelings, weeks during which Clara had continued her healing work while carefully considering the path forward, examining her own heart with the same careful attention she typically reserved for diagnosing her patient's ailments. A messenger arrived that morning, cold and weary from traveling through the early winter storm, carrying a letter bearing the Ashwood royal seal. Clara accepted the letter with steady hands, recognizing Ethan's handwriting as she broke the seal and began reading. The letter described in careful detail the changes he had implemented within the kingdom since their conversation weeks earlier, the new policies preventing future injustices, his efforts to restore the southern farmlands and repair strained diplomatic relationships, and his ongoing commitment to becoming a leader who genuinely valued trust and partnership over pride and hasty judgment. He did not press her for an immediate decision. He simply shared his progress honestly, closing the letter with words that struck her deeply. "Whatever you decide, Clara, know that I am genuinely grateful for the lessons your absence has taught me, lessons I wish I had learned through wisdom rather than through the profound pain I caused you. I will continue this work regardless of your answer, because it is simply the right path for this kingdom, and because you deserved a partner who valued you this way from the very beginning." Clara set the letter down carefully, feeling the genuine sincerity within his words, a sincerity that seemed to reflect real, sustained change rather than simple, desperate pleading for her return. Later that same day, Adrian found her still holding the letter, her expression thoughtful as she processed its contents. "News from the kingdom?" he asked carefully. "Ethan continues implementing genuine reforms," Clara said, sharing the letter's contents with Adrian honestly, valuing the transparency that had become an important foundation of their relationship over recent months. "He does not press me for a decision. He simply shares his progress and leaves the choice entirely in my hands." Adrian absorbed this information carefully, recognizing the significance of Ethan's continued, patient effort. "That sounds like genuine growth," he acknowledged, though clearly the words cost him some effort given his own hopes regarding Clara's future. "It does," Clara agreed, "though genuine growth on his part does not necessarily mean I must choose to return to that life." "What does your heart tell you now, after these additional weeks of consideration?" Adrian asked, echoing the question he had posed weeks earlier. Clara considered his question with the same careful thoughtfulness she brought to every significant decision in her life. "I have realized something important these past weeks, Adrian. My identity, my sense of worth, is no longer tied to whether I am queen or simply a healer known as Elowin. I have proven to myself, through months of building this life independently, that my value exists entirely separate from any title or position. That is a remarkable realization," Adrian said softly. It means, Clara continued, that whatever decision I ultimately make, whether returning to Ashwood or remaining here, or perhaps choosing some entirely different path, I am making that choice from genuine strength and freedom, rather than from fear or obligation or desperate need for validation from either kingdom or crown. Adrian nodded slowly, sensing that Clara was approaching the culmination of her lengthy consideration, though he remained uncertain which direction her decision might ultimately take. And where does that leave us, Clara? Where does that leave your feelings toward me? Clara met his gaze directly, appreciating his courage in asking such a direct question despite the uncertainty still surrounding her final decision. I care for you deeply, Adrian. Your friendship, your respect, your patience throughout these difficult months, they have meant more to me than words can easily express. But I must be honest with you, as you have always been honest with me. Please, continue, Adrian said, bracing himself for whatever she might share next. I do not yet know whether my feelings toward you represent genuine romantic love, or whether they represent deep gratitude and appreciation for the safety and purpose you offered me during a time when I desperately needed both, Clara admitted honestly. I owe it to both of us, and to myself, to be certain before making any commitment that could shape both our futures so significantly. Adrian absorbed her words with evident disappointment, though also with clear respect for her honesty. I appreciate your truthfulness, even when it is not the answer I might have hoped to hear. You deserve someone who chooses you with absolute certainty, Adrian, Clara said gently, not someone still working through complicated feelings regarding her past. Whatever I ultimately decide, I want it to be a decision made with complete clarity, for your sake as much as for mine. Their conversation continued thoughtfully into the evening, both acknowledging the genuine complexity of the situation, neither rushing toward easy answers or false promises that might later prove hollow. As winter continued settling across the territory, Clara found herself increasingly aware that the time for her final decision was rapidly approaching, regardless of how much additional reflection she might still desire. Meanwhile, within the Ashwood Kingdom, Ethan continued his steady work of reform, though the uncertainty regarding Clara's eventual decision weighed increasingly on his mind as the winter deepened. He received occasional updates from Peter regarding conditions within Adrian's territory, careful reports that mentioned nothing inappropriate or intrusive, simply confirming that Clara remained healthy and continued her valuable healing work throughout the region. One evening, as heavy snow fell across the palace grounds, Ethan found himself once again reviewing Clara's old journal, drawn back to her private reflections during quiet moments of doubt and loneliness. He read again her hopeful entries from before her banishment, entries describing her growing affection for him despite the political nature of their initial marriage arrangement. He thought of how easily he had destroyed that fragile, growing affection through his hasty judgment and misplaced trust in Nathan's false counsel. He thought too of Adrian, a man whose genuine character he could not help but respect, despite the painful jealousy stirred by the possibility that Clara's heart might ultimately belong to him instead. Grace found him there late that evening, the journal open before him, his expression carrying a quiet, resigned sadness she had rarely witnessed from her king. You fear she will choose to remain within Lord Voss's territory, Grace observed gently. I fear that outcome, Ethan admitted honestly, though I recognize I have no right to demand otherwise, given everything I have already cost her. If she finds genuine happiness there, whether with Adrian or simply through her independent healing work, I must accept that outcome with grace, regardless of my own personal wishes. That is a mature perspective, Your Majesty, Grace said. Though I do believe, having served the Queen for many years, that she valued something genuine within your marriage, something beyond simple political arrangement. Whether that genuine connection remains strong enough to overcome everything that has happened since, only she can determine. Ethan nodded slowly, appreciating Grace's honest perspective, though it offered little concrete comfort regarding the uncertain outcome that continued to weigh heavily upon him as the winter season progressed, and the moment of Clara's ultimate decision drew inexorably closer. That uncertainty was interrupted abruptly by an urgent message arriving at the palace gates late one night, carried by an exhausted rider who had traveled without rest along the border roads. Raiders had struck a trading caravan near the boundary between Ashwood lands and Adrian's territory, leaving several travelers wounded and stranded in the bitter cold with no immediate access to proper medical care. The nearest healer with sufficient skill for these injuries resides within Lord Voss's territory, the rider reported. But the roads between here and there have become treacherous with the recent snowfall, and Lord Voss's own forces are stretched thin pursuing the raiders responsible. Ethan acted immediately, gathering a small company of soldiers and physicians, determined to reach the wounded travelers before the harsh winter conditions claimed additional lives. He rode through the night alongside Marcus, pushing their horses carefully but urgently along the icy roads toward the border region where the attack had occurred. Word of the raid reached Adrian's territory almost simultaneously, and Clara, upon hearing of wounded travelers in desperate need of medical attention, immediately gathered her supplies and insisted on accompanying the small rescue party Adrian assembled to respond to the crisis. "The roads are dangerous, Clara," Adrian cautioned, though he recognized from her expression that attempting to dissuade her would prove futile. "People are suffering and may die without proper treatment," Clara replied firmly. "I did not build this life to hide safely away while others need my help most urgently." They rode out together through the falling snow, reaching the site of the attack roughly the same time Ethan's party arrived from the opposite direction, both groups converging upon a scene of considerable chaos. Overturned carts lay scattered across the frozen road, several travelers huddled together for warmth around a hastily built fire, their injuries ranging from broken bones to deep wounds requiring immediate attention before infection could set in. Clara moved instantly into action, assessing each patient with practiced efficiency, directing Adrian's soldiers to help stabilize the most severely injured, while she began treating wounds with the herbs and supplies she had brought along for exactly this kind of emergency. Ethan, dismounting quickly upon arrival, found himself momentarily frozen at the sight of Clara working with calm, decisive authority amid the chaos, her healing skills clearly honed through months of dedicated practice within Adrian's territory. He recovered quickly, however, directing his own soldiers to assist with securing the area and providing additional warmth and shelter for the wounded. "We need more bandages," Clara called out, and Ethan immediately moved to help, tearing strips from spare cloth his soldiers carried, bringing them directly to her without hesitation, despite the awkwardness of their recent personal history. Working side by side through the freezing night, Clara and Ethan found themselves cooperating with a natural rhythm neither had fully expected, their shared focus on saving the wounded travelers temporarily setting aside the complicated emotional tension that had defined their previous interactions since her banishment. "You have become remarkably skilled," Ethan observed quietly, during a brief pause as Clara finished stabilizing one particularly severe injury. "I have had considerable practice," Clara replied, though not unkindly, focusing her attention back on her patient rather than dwelling on the underlying implications of his observation. As dawn finally broke over the snow-covered landscape, the immediate crisis had been successfully managed. All the wounded travelers had been stabilized, with the most severe cases prepared for careful transport to proper healing facilities within Adrian's territory. Adrian himself arrived shortly after sunrise, having successfully pursued and apprehended several of the raiders responsible for the attack, ensuring they would face appropriate justice for their crimes. As the combined rescue efforts wound down and preparations began for transporting the wounded to safety, Clara found herself standing between Ethan and Adrian for the first time since the complicated dynamics of recent months had fully emerged, all three understanding the significance of this unexpected shared crisis. "Thank you both," Clara said honestly, addressing them together, "for responding so quickly to help these people, despite whatever tensions might exist between our territories, or between us personally. Their well-being matters more than any personal complications," Ethan said sincerely, and Adrian nodded in genuine agreement. As the wounded were carefully loaded for transport and the small combined company began the careful journey back toward proper shelter, Clara found herself reflecting deeply on the night's events, on the way both men had immediately prioritized helping others without hesitation, on the strange clarity that crisis sometimes brought to previously complicated emotional questions. She realized, watching Ethan work tirelessly alongside her throughout the night, treating even minor cuts among the survivors with genuine care rather than delegating such tasks entirely to others, that his transformation appeared to run deeper than mere words or promises, and watching Adrian's fierce, protective pursuit of the raiders responsible for the attack, she recognized again the genuine strength of character that had drawn her toward him during recent months. Neither realization made her ultimate decision any simpler, but the shared crisis had crystallized something important within her, a growing certainty that whatever path she chose, it needed to be decided soon, with full honesty toward herself and toward both men who had shown, in their own distinct ways, genuine care for her well-being and for the well-being of those around her. As the winter sun rose fully over the snow-covered landscape, illuminating the aftermath of the night's dramatic crisis, Clara understood that the time for her final decision had arrived, and that delaying it any further would serve no one well, least of all herself. 3 days after the harrowing rescue along the border road, Clara requested a meeting with both Ethan and Adrian together, understanding that whatever decision she reached deserved to be communicated honestly and directly to both men. rather than through separate conversations that might allow lingering uncertainty or misunderstanding to persist. They gathered in the same healing house garden where Clara and Ethan had first spoken weeks earlier, now blanketed in snow, the winter chill sharp against their faces as they waited to hear what she had finally decided. "I want to thank you both," Clara began, her voice steady despite the significance of the moment, "for your patience throughout these past months, and for the genuine care you have each shown, in your own distinct ways, toward my well-being, during an extraordinarily difficult period of my life." Both men remained respectfully silent, allowing her to continue without interruption. "Ethan," she said, turning toward him directly, "your genuine efforts toward reform, your patience in allowing me the space to make this decision freely, and your evident growth since the day you wrongfully banished me, these things have not gone unnoticed. I believe you have genuinely learned from your failures, and I believe you would strive to be a better partner should I choose to return." Ethan's expression carried cautious hope, though he remained silent, sensing she had more to share. "Adrian," Clara continued, turning toward him, "your friendship, your respect for my autonomy, and yes, your genuine affection, have meant more to me than I can easily express. You have shown me, through consistent action rather than empty words, exactly the kind of partner I once believed I deserved but had never fully experienced until arriving within your territory." Adrian nodded slowly, bracing himself for whatever conclusion her words were building toward. "But I have realized something important during these months of reflection," Clara said, her gaze shifting to encompass both men equally. "My decision cannot be based simply on choosing between the two of you, as though my future were merely a matter of selecting the better suitor. My decision must be based on what genuinely serves my own purpose and happiness, independent of either of your feelings toward me, however genuine and appreciated those feelings may be." A tense silence followed her words, both men clearly uncertain what conclusion she was ultimately building toward. "I have decided," Clara finally said, "that I will not return to Ashwood as queen, at least not in the traditional sense that once defined that role." Ethan's face fell slightly, though he maintained his composure, having genuinely prepared himself for this possible outcome throughout recent weeks of honest self-reflection. "However," Clara continued, "I also do not believe remaining permanently within Adrian's territory, however wonderful that territory, and its people have been to me, represents the complete answer to what I genuinely want for my future." Now Adrian's expression shifted with evident surprise, having perhaps expected a clearer resolution in his favor given her earlier comments regarding his character. "What I have realized," Clara explained, "is that my true calling lies in the healing work itself. Work that should not be confined by the borders of any single kingdom or territory. Work that has given me genuine purpose, precisely because it serves people directly, rather than through the indirect influence of political position or title." "What exactly are you proposing?" Ethan asked carefully, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier disappointment. "I intend to establish an independent healing house," Clara said, "one that serves travelers and communities across both your territories, and perhaps eventually beyond, without being bound exclusively to either kingdom's court or governance. I will maintain my innocence as publicly declared, Ethan, and I thank you sincerely for that restoration of my reputation, but I do not wish to reclaim my former title as queen, as that role no longer represents who I have become, or who I wish to be moving forward." Both men absorbed this unexpected resolution carefully, recognizing the genuine wisdom and independence reflected in her decision, even as it meant neither would receive the outcome they had perhaps quietly hoped for regarding their personal feelings toward her. "As for matters of the heart," Clara continued, addressing the underlying tension that had shaped much of the recent months, "I believe it would be unwise and unfair to both of you, and to myself, to commit to either of you romantically at this particular moment. I need to fully establish this new independent path before I can honestly consider what role romantic partnership might play within it, with either of you, or with anyone else who might enter my life moving forward." "That seems a wise and honest position," Adrian said, genuine respect evident in his tone despite his personal disappointment. "I agree," Ethan added, though the words carried evident difficulty given his own hopes for reconciliation. "You deserve the freedom to build this new path entirely on your own terms, without either of us complicating that process through premature expectations." Clara felt genuine relief at their mature, respectful acceptance of her decision, relief that confirmed she had chosen correctly in valuing their friendship and their genuine care for her well-being, over any pressure to make an immediate romantic commitment to either of them. "I would ask for your support," she said, addressing both men directly. In establishing this independent healing house along the border between your territories, a neutral space serving people from both lands, along with any travelers passing through who might require medical assistance. You have my full support, Ethan said immediately. I will ensure the kingdom provides whatever resources you require, without any conditions attached beyond your own wishes for how this healing house should operate. As will I, Adrian confirmed. My territory's resources remain fully available to support this endeavor, exactly as you envision it. Over the following weeks, with both men providing genuine support without attempting to claim exclusive influence over her new project, Clara began establishing her independent healing house along the border region, a modest but well-constructed building that would eventually grow into a respected center for medical knowledge and treatment, serving people from both kingdoms without prejudice or political complication. Grace, upon hearing of Clara's decision, requested permission to join her former queen's new endeavor, having grown weary of court politics and genuinely inspired by the independent path Clara had chosen to forge for herself. Clara welcomed her warmly, grateful for the continued loyalty and friendship Grace had demonstrated throughout the entire ordeal. Samuel, too, eventually extended his blessing for Clara to establish additional apothecary connections between Millbrook and her new healing house, recognizing the valuable network of medical knowledge and resources that could benefit communities throughout the wider region. As winter gradually began yielding to the first signs of approaching spring, Clara's healing house grew steadily, earning a reputation throughout both territories as a place where genuine care and skilled treatment could be found, regardless of one's status, wealth, or political affiliation. She trained local apprentices in her methods, ensuring her knowledge would continue benefiting the region long after her own direct involvement in any individual case. Both Ethan and Adrian continued their respectful, patient support of her work, each finding their own way to demonstrate genuine care, without pressuring her toward any particular romantic outcome. Ethan continued his reforms within Ashwood, implementing lasting changes that would protect the kingdom from similar injustices in the future, while Adrian continued his fair and thoughtful governance of his own territory, both men transformed in their own ways by their experiences throughout this difficult but ultimately clarifying period. Clara, for her part, found genuine fulfillment in the independent life she had built entirely on her own terms, a life defined by purpose, skill, and authentic connection, rather than by crown, title, or the expectations of others. Yet even as her healing house flourished and her new life took steady shape, danger continued lurking at the edges of her hard-won peace. Nathan Cole, exiled from Ashwood lands but far from finished with his bitterness, had settled in a distant border town, nursing his disgrace and plotting quietly for some way to reclaim the influence and status he had lost. Word eventually reached him of Clara's growing healing house, of the respect and admiration she continued earning throughout both territories, and of the genuine friendship she now shared with both King Ethan and Lord Voss. The knowledge that the woman he had tried so hard to destroy now thrived more brightly than ever filled him with a bitter, festering resentment that he could not release. Through contacts he had cultivated during his years as advisor, contacts who remained loyal to him despite his disgrace, Nathan learned of a shipment of rare medicinal herbs traveling toward Clara's healing house, herbs essential for treating a particularly severe illness that had begun spreading through several villages in the border region. Seeing an opportunity for cruel revenge, he arranged for the shipment to be intercepted and destroyed, hoping to cripple her healing efforts and tarnish her growing reputation. When news of the intercepted shipment reached Clara, she immediately recognized the timing and circumstances as suspicious rather than simple misfortune. She sent word to both Ethan and Adrian, explaining her concerns, and both men responded with immediate seriousness, understanding the potential danger such sabotage represented not only to Clara's work, but to the vulnerable patients depending on her treatment. Marcus Reed, still serving faithfully as Ethan's most trusted officer, launched a discreet investigation into the intercepted shipment, eventually tracing the sabotage back to associates of Nathan's remaining network within the border regions. The evidence pointed clearly toward the exiled advisor's continued interference, despite his supposed banishment from any involvement in kingdom affairs. He cannot simply accept his disgrace and move forward with whatever remains of his life, Ethan said grimly, upon receiving Marcus's findings. He continues seeking to harm Clara, even now, driven by nothing more than bitter resentment over his own failures. Adrian, equally troubled by the news, dispatched his own soldiers to help secure the roads leading toward Clara's healing house, ensuring future shipments of essential supplies would travel under proper protection. We cannot allow him to continue threatening the safety of her work or the well-being of the patients who depend upon her, Adrian said firmly. Together, coordinating their efforts across both territories for the first time in genuine partnership rather than rivalry, Ethan and Adrian worked to track down Nathan's remaining network of contacts, eventually locating the exiled advisor himself hiding within a modest border settlement, having grown increasingly desperate and reckless in his continued efforts at revenge. When soldiers from both territories arrived to apprehend him, Nathan offered little resistance, his schemes having finally exhausted whatever resources and support remained available to him. She should have simply accepted her fate, he muttered bitterly, as guards secured him for transport back toward formal justice. Instead, she rises higher than she ever did as queen, while I am left with nothing. You created your own downfall through your own choices, Ethan replied coldly, having traveled personally to oversee Nathan's capture, given the personal significance of finally resolving this lingering threat. Clara's success is a testament to her own character and resilience, qualities you attempted to destroy, but ultimately could never truly extinguish. With Nathan's final scheme thoroughly dismantled and the exiled advisor placed under permanent, closely monitored confinement to prevent any future interference, Clara's healing house continued its steady growth, now further protected by the coordinated efforts of both territories working genuinely together for the first time. The successful resolution of this final threat brought Ethan and Adrian into a new kind of working relationship, one built on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting Clara's independent path, rather than competing rivalry over her personal affections. Both men recognized, through this shared challenge, that their genuine care for her well-being mattered more than any personal desire for exclusive romantic claim upon her heart. As the last remnants of winter finally melted away, and the first genuine signs of spring began appearing across the border region, Clara's healing house stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal, having weathered not only the natural challenges of establishing something entirely new, but also the final, bitter attempt by a disgraced advisor to destroy what she had so carefully built from the ashes of her wrongful banishment. Whatever future romantic possibilities might eventually emerge from her continued friendships with either Ethan or Adrian, she now approached that uncertain future from a place of genuine strength and self-determined happiness, precisely the outcome she had quietly hoped to discover since the day she walked away from the Ashwood Palace with a calm, knowing smile that had haunted a king and inspired countless others who would eventually hear her remarkable story. A full year had passed since Clara walked out of the Ashwood Palace with nothing but a small satchel and an unshakable calm that no one in that great hall had understood at the time, and now, standing at the entrance of her thriving healing house, she found herself reflecting on just how far that quiet, determined walk had ultimately carried her. The healing house had grown far beyond her initial modest expectations, now a respected center of medical knowledge, staffed by several trained apprentices, serving hundreds of patients from both Ashwood and Adrian's territory, along with travelers from increasingly distant regions who had heard of the remarkable healer who had once been unjustly cast aside as a queen, only to rebuild something even more meaningful, entirely on her own terms. Spring sunshine warmed the courtyard where Clara now stood, watching as patients arrived for their morning treatments. Apprentices moved efficiently between examination rooms, and the steady rhythm of purposeful work continued around her, exactly the life she had chosen for herself, with clear eyes and genuine conviction. Grace approached her with a warm smile, having found her own genuine purpose within the healing house, as Clara's most trusted assistant and organizer. Both Lord Voss and King Ethan have sent word that they will arrive today for the healing house's anniversary celebration, Grace reported. The entire border region seems eager to celebrate everything you have built here this past year. Clara smiled genuinely at the news, no longer feeling the complicated tension that had once surrounded any mention of either man's name. Over the past year, her relationships with both Ethan and Adrian had evolved into something entirely unexpected, yet deeply valuable. Genuine friendships built on mutual respect rather than competing romantic pressure. Ethan had continued his sincere efforts toward reform within Ashwood, implementing lasting changes that had strengthened the kingdom's stability and prevented any recurrence of the kind of injustice that had once nearly destroyed Clara's life. His visits to the healing house, though occasional given his duties as king, always carried genuine warmth and respect rather than any lingering pressure regarding romantic reconciliation. Adrian, similarly, had continued his fair and thoughtful governance of his own territory, his friendship with Clara deepening into a comfortable, genuine bond that neither felt compelled to define through the narrow lens of romantic expectation. Both men had, in their own ways, grown significantly through the experiences of the past year, transformed by witnessing Clara's remarkable resilience and by the genuine lessons they had each learned regarding trust, humility, and respect for another person's autonomy. As the afternoon progressed and preparations for the anniversary celebration continued throughout the Healing House grounds, both Ethan and Adrian arrived within a short time of each other, each bringing gifts of appreciation for the Healing House's continued success. Gifts that reflected genuine friendship rather than any competing attempt to win exclusive favor. "The kingdom continues to benefit from the lessons your example has taught us," Ethan said warmly, as he greeted Clara amid the festive atmosphere of the celebration. "I remain deeply grateful for your continued grace toward me, despite everything I once cost you." "We have both grown considerably this past year," Clara replied honestly. "I believe we have each found genuine peace in our own paths forward, separate yet still connected through the respect we continue sharing." Adrian, arriving shortly afterward, echoed similar sentiments, his own friendship with Clara having settled into a comfortable rhythm that brought genuine joy to them both, without the earlier romantic uncertainty that had once complicated their interactions. As the celebration continued into the evening, with patients, apprentices, and visitors from both territories mingling freely in genuine camaraderie, Clara found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the cold, cruel judgment she had once faced in that great hall, of the false accusations that had cost her everything she had believed defined her identity, and of the calm, knowing smile she had offered as she walked away from that painful chapter of her life. That smile, she now understood fully, had reflected not naive confidence or hidden madness, as some in that hall might have assumed, but rather a deep, quiet certainty regarding her own inherent worth, a certainty that no crown, no title, and no cruel judgment could ever truly take from her. She had lost her position as queen, her home within the palace, and the identity she had constructed around her marriage to Ethan. But in losing all of that, she had discovered something far more valuable and lasting, a genuine understanding of her own strength, her own purpose, and her own capacity to build a meaningful life, entirely on her own terms, regardless of whatever external circumstances or judgments others might impose upon her. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing into the warm spring evening, Clara stood once more at the entrance of her healing house, watching Ethan and Adrian depart together toward their respective territories, having spent the celebration in genuine, comfortable friendship rather than competing rivalry, a transformation that reflected the genuine growth both men had experienced throughout the past year's events. Grace joined her at the entrance, following the last of the departing guests. "It has been quite a journey since that terrible day in the Great Hall," Grace observed quietly. "It has," Clara agreed, watching the stars begin appearing across the darkening sky. "Though I no longer think of that day with the bitterness I once carried, it taught me something essential about my own worth, something I might never have discovered had I remained comfortably within the palace, defined entirely by a crown and a marriage I never fully chose for myself." "Do you have any regrets?" Grace asked gently. Clara considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "I regret the pain caused by Nathan's cruel betrayal, and I regret the months of uncertainty and separation that resulted from Ethan's hasty judgment. But I do not regret the path my life has taken since that difficult day. I have found genuine purpose, genuine friendship, and genuine peace, precisely because I refuse to let that cruel banishment define my sense of self-worth." As the night deepened around them, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude for everything her difficult journey had ultimately taught her. Gratitude that extended even toward the painful betrayal that had originally set this remarkable chain of events into motion. She understood now, with complete clarity, why she had smiled as she walked away from that palace a year earlier, a smile born from an unshakable inner knowledge that her true worth had never depended on any crown, any title, or any judgment passed against her by those who failed to see her true character clearly. The Healing House continued its steady, meaningful work in the months and years that followed, growing into a lasting symbol throughout the region of resilience, genuine purpose, and the remarkable strength that could emerge from even the most unjust and painful circumstances. Clara's story spread throughout both territories and beyond, inspiring countless others who faced their own moments of unjust judgment or painful betrayal to remember that their true worth, like hers, could never truly be taken from them by anyone else's cruel or hasty decisions. Earlier that same celebration day, before the evening festivities had begun, a young woman named Eliza had arrived at the Healing House gates, carrying her infant son who had been struggling with a persistent cough that local physicians in her distant village had failed to properly treat. Clara had examined the child carefully, recognizing symptoms she had encountered many times over the past year, and had prepared a careful remedy that eased the infant's breathing within hours. "I traveled 3 days to reach you," Eliza had said, tears of relief streaming down her face as she watched her son finally breathe easily. and settle into peaceful sleep. Everyone in my village speaks of the healer who was once wrongfully cast out as a queen, yet built something even greater from that injustice. I did not truly believe such a story until I witnessed your skill myself. Clara had smiled gently at the young mother's words, recognizing in them an echo of her own journey. Sometimes what looks like an ending is simply the beginning of something we could not have imagined for ourselves, she had said. I am simply grateful I can offer your son the same chance at health and happiness that so many others have found here. Eliza had stayed through the anniversary celebration, watching with quiet wonder as patients, apprentices, and even the king and lord of two separate territories moved together in genuine warmth and mutual respect, all gathered because of the healing house Clara had built from nothing more than her own resilience and skill. Before departing the following morning to begin her journey home, Eliza had approached Clara one final time. "Thank you," she said simply, "not only for healing my son, but for showing everyone who hears your story that a cruel ending does not have to be the final word in anyone's life." Clara had embraced the young mother warmly, watching her depart down the road with her healthy son bundled safely against the morning chill, feeling once again the quiet, profound satisfaction that came from work rooted entirely in genuine purpose rather than obligation or expectation. Now, standing beside Grace as the stars deepened overhead following the celebration's conclusion, Clara thought of Eliza's words, of the countless other patients whose lives had been touched by the healing house's steady work, and of the strange, unexpected gratitude she felt even toward the painful betrayal that had first set her upon this remarkable path. "Do you ever think about what might have happened?" Grace asked quietly. "If Nathan's scheme had never been discovered, if you had simply remained in exile without ever learning the truth had come to light?" Clara considered the question thoughtfully. "I have thought about it, yes, and I believe even in that possibility, I would have continued building this life regardless. Perhaps I would never have learned the full truth behind my banishment. Perhaps Ethan and Adrian would never have become the genuine friends they are to me now. But I believe I still would have found purpose in healing others, because that purpose came from within myself, not from any external validation or vindication." "That is a remarkable perspective," Grace said softly. "It is simply the truth I discovered through this entire journey," Clara replied. "Our worth is never truly determined by those who judge us unfairly, nor even by those who eventually recognize their errors and seek to make amends. Our worth exists within us from the very beginning, waiting patiently to be recognized and expressed through whatever path we ultimately choose to walk." As the healing house settled into quiet nighttime stillness around them, its steady work paused only briefly before resuming again with the following morning's light. Clara felt a deep and settled peace, the same quiet strength that had carried her through that cold winter's night of urgent rescue, through the difficult conversations with both Ethan and Adrian, and through every challenge that had emerged since the day of her wrongful banishment. She thought once more of that fateful afternoon in the Ashwood Great Hall, of Ethan's cold pronouncement and Nathan's calculated lies, and of her own calm, unshaken response as she walked away without a single tear. She understood now, more fully than she ever had, exactly why she had smiled in that moment, a smile that had unsettled an entire court and haunted a king for months afterward. It had been the smile of a woman who already knew, deep within herself, that whatever cruelty others chose to inflict upon her, they could never touch the genuine worth and strength that resided at her very core, a worth that no false accusation, no cold judgment, and no cruel banishment could ever truly diminish or destroy. And so, the story of the cruel king who once banished his innocent queen, only to watch her walk away with a calm, knowing smile that would haunt him until he finally understood its true meaning, became a lasting legend throughout the land. Not a story of bitter revenge or desperate reconciliation, but a genuine testament to the quiet, unshakable strength that comes from truly knowing one's own worth, regardless of whatever crown one wears, or whatever crown one chooses, with clear eyes and genuine conviction to leave behind entirely.